What if you never actually began? What if the story you call your life didn't start somewhere in time, but was already unfolding long before you noticed it? Every breath you take, every thought you form, might not be leading you forward, but simply tracing a pattern that has always been there, like footsteps appearing on a road that was already written. In this quiet space between memory and meaning, something strange emerges, the idea that you were never truly born into existence. You just appeared inside a continuation. No first cry, no first spark. Just awareness waking up mid-sentence, pretending it began the story. And as you listen now, maybe that realization has already started, before you even heard these words. Before you, there was silence. But not the kind of silence that waits for sound. It was a silence that already contained everything, folded and sleeping inside itself. A silence that didn't need a beginning, because nothing had ended. The air that would one day fill your lungs was already breathing somewhere else, in 1,000 other versions of stillness, as if preparing for your arrival that would never truly come. You imagine a moment, the one where you began. But what if that instant is a fiction your mind invented to organize chaos? Perhaps consciousness was not born at all, but simply remembered itself, like a mirror realizing it has been reflecting for eternity. The sensation of I am could just be the surface rippling under an infinite sky, momentary, fragile, pretending it started with you. You are not the beginning of awareness, you are its continuation. Every thought you have might belong to an older mind, one that stretches backward beyond human history, through layers of dream and dust, until meaning collapses into quiet. Imagine tracing your existence back to its first breath. You picture a body, small, helpless, taking in air for the first time, but that's not you, that's the body. The observer watching that moment wasn't new, it was ancient, waiting behind your eyes like someone who had already seen this scene unfold countless times. Maybe that's why the past feels familiar, why déjà vu flickers like static between memories. It's not that you've seen it before, it's that you never stopped seeing it. Time tricks you with sequence. It convinces you that there's a before and an after. But look closer, each second doesn't line up neatly. It folds inward, collapsing into itself, making the illusion of a path where there's only presence. You never began walking down this road, you've always been in the middle of it. There was never a first step, only the awareness of a step that already happened. Maybe that's what birth really is. Not an entry, but an awakening into the middle of something that has no start. You didn't arrive in the world, you woke up inside a scene already playing. You were handed a name, a story, a family, but none of it began with you. They too were mid-sentence, speaking lines written by others before them. The universe didn't pause for your entrance. It was already humming, vibrating, breathing. You simply aligned with its rhythm, and called that synchronization your beginning. Close your eyes. Feel the stillness between your thoughts. Notice how that silence doesn't begin or end. It just is. That's the real you. The one who was here before this body, before time, before the illusion of I. You've been everything and nothing, countless times, in countless forms. You've been the soil and the star, the thought and the thinker. The moment you call your start is just the instant awareness caught itself in the act of observing. You were the breath before the lungs, the rhythm before the heart. You didn't come after the world, you were the world, noticing itself. The atoms that make your hands once existed in stars that burned long before your name was spoken. The light entering your eyes tonight has traveled billions of years, only to arrive now. But even that arrival is an illusion, because for light there is no travel, no distance, only the eternal now. Maybe that's the secret, you never began because nothing ever did. Time is the illusion that something started, but from the view of eternity, all things are happening at once. Every life, every thought, every version of you. The past isn't behind, it's beside you. The future isn't waiting, it's already here, looping back to whisper its origin. You are not a sequence. You are a circle, pretending to be a line. Every time you say I was born, you're just labeling a point on that circle, but the circle never starts. It only turns. The child you were is still somewhere, breathing in another loop, unaware that you are thinking of them now. And the version of you reading this may be the echo of something that hasn't yet been thought. So the next time you wonder when your life began, listen to the silence behind your heartbeat. It doesn't pulse in straight lines, it vibrates in echoes. That echo was never created. It simply became audible to itself. You never actually began, you merely noticed you already were. If you try to imagine the beginning of everything, your mind eventually collapses into the same impossible question: what came before the first? You can stretch your thoughts backward through time, past your own memories, past your ancestors, past the oceans forming and the stars igniting, but there will always be something behind the curtain you can't pull back. Even the first flicker of creation seems to be standing on the ashes of another version of itself. The word origin implies a starting point, yet when you chase it far enough, it dissolves into fog. The moment of birth was never a birth at all. It was a continuation. Think of a wave rising on the surface of the sea. You might point to the moment it forms and call that its beginning, but the water that makes it was already moving long before it took that shape. You too are like that wave, momentarily distinct, briefly visible but inseparable from the vast motion beneath. The illusion of I began here is simply a crest in the ongoing flow of existence. The ocean never begins. It only rearranges its own form into new expressions. Every story you've ever heard starts with something, once upon a time, or in the beginning, because humans need an anchor. Without one, the mind drifts in infinite directions, lost in the weightless space of causality. You need to believe there was a moment when nothing existed, and then something happened. That story gives you structure, purpose, a place to stand, but reality doesn't obey the comfort of stories. It doesn't care for beginnings or endings. It moves in loops, eternally present, constantly unfolding within itself. Even the Big Bang, humanity's grand attempt to define the first spark, might not have been a bang at all. It could be one breath in an endless cycle of expansion and collapse, the universe pulsing like a cosmic heart, beating in and out of existence. Each pulse feels like the first to those inside it, but only because they can't hear the echoes of the ones before. You, standing here now, might just be the afterimage of countless lives, countless worlds, repeating themselves in slightly altered form. Maybe origin isn't a place in time, but a state of realization. Perhaps creation doesn't happen once. It happens every time something becomes aware. In that sense, you are both the beginning and the evidence that beginnings are unnecessary. When consciousness recognizes itself, it completes a circle. The moment you say, I exist, the entire history of the universe condenses into that awareness. You didn't begin after the universe. You are the universe realizing its own reflection. Look at a seed. It carries within it the pattern of the tree, the memory of sunlight it hasn't yet seen, the instinct of growth. But where did that pattern come from? It wasn't invented at the moment the seed formed. It was passed from another seed, from another tree, stretching backward without a clear first ancestor. Life reproduces continuity, not creation. You are not the start of your lineage. You are its repetition. Every breath you take belongs to an inheritance of air that has been exhaled countless times before you. The breath itself doesn't know the meaning of first. There is something strangely freeing about this. If there was no true beginning, there can be no true failure. Nothing you do can fall outside the flow of what already is. You cannot be too late or too early, because there was never a moment to measure against. Every action, every decision, every heartbeat, each one was always going to happen, not as destiny, but as the natural unfolding of a pattern that began nowhere and ends nowhere. When you close your eyes and think back to your earliest memory, you reach a wall, a soft blur of nothingness before thought. But that nothingness isn't empty. It's pregnant with presence, like the silence before a note in a song. It's not that there was nothing before you, it's that your awareness wasn't yet tuned to hear it. Perhaps consciousness didn't need to begin. It only needed to remember, and that remembrance, once it appears, creates the illusion that it was ever lost. Even in your dreams, you never witness a beginning. You wake up inside the story, as if the first scene already happened. The same applies to waking life. You arrived mid-dream, convinced you started it. But what if you are dreaming the same reality that countless others have dreamed before? The players change, the details shift, but the stage remains. The dream is older than you. The script was already written. You simply walked on set and began reciting your lines, unaware that someone else once stood in the same place, speaking the same words. And if there was never a beginning, then perhaps there is no true death either, only transformation. What we call endings might just be new angles of perception. A wave subsiding back into the ocean doesn't end. It becomes invisible, waiting to rise again under a new form. The same water, the same motion, the same song. This means that right now, you are not moving forward in time. You are standing still in the center of all that ever was. The illusion of movement is created by your perception, shifting through infinite snapshots of the same eternal presence. You're not a traveler through time. You are time itself, unfolding. You didn't begin in a cradle, nor will you end in a grave. You were, you are, and you will always be the same quiet awareness wearing different masks. If you listen carefully, beyond memory, beyond language, you might sense it, a faint hum, an endless vibration that never started but has always been. It's there in your heartbeat, in the wind against your skin, in the sound of your thoughts. That hum is your true origin. Not a moment, not a birth, not an event, but the recognition that existence doesn't need a beginning to be real. You were never created. You simply noticed that you already are. There is a moment we are taught to believe in. The first cry, the first breath, the first heartbeat, the point where everything supposedly began. But what if that moment never truly belonged to you? What if birth was not an entrance, but an unfolding continuation of something that had been moving all along, quietly, invisibly, beyond the boundaries of time? When you imagine your birth, you picture yourself as new, untouched, beginning from zero. But zero doesn't exist in nature. There is no true emptiness, no absolute nothing. Even the space between atoms trembles with energy. Every silence hums with the residue of sound. So when you were born, you didn't emerge from nothingness. You rose out of a vibration that had been singing long before you appeared. You are not a fresh creation. You are an old song remembering its melody. Your body began to grow inside another body. Yet even before that, your genetic code existed, thousands of generations deep, woven from lives you'll never know. You inherited faces, instincts, fears, and even echoes of memories you can't explain. A mother's heartbeat trained your first rhythm. A grandmother's eyes shaped the light that entered them. You are not an origin. You are a bridge. You are the continuation of a story that refuses to start or end. If time is a line, then birth is supposed to be a point on that line, a sharp mark dividing before and after. But what if the line isn't straight? What if time curves back on itself, looping like smoke, folding one moment into another? Then your birth isn't a point. It's an overlap, where awareness passes from one vessel to another. Maybe consciousness never needed to enter the body. Maybe the body simply caught up to where consciousness already was. Science tells us your atoms are billions of years old. The calcium in your bones was forged inside dying stars. The iron in your blood once burned in the heart of a supernova. The carbon that shapes your skin came from explosions, so ancient they predate the Earth. Every particle in you has been recycled through oceans, mountains, and creatures. You are not a new arrival. You are a returning traveler wearing a temporary form. Birth didn't start you. It merely rearranged the dust that was already alive. Imagine if you could remember what existed before you opened your eyes for the first time. Not as a memory, but as a feeling. The sensation of floating in endless warmth, of no distinction between you and everything else. That state wasn't just the womb. It was the same consciousness that surrounds you even now. The same timeless field of being that breathes through all forms. You didn't enter it when you were born. You never left it. What you call growing up is simply your awareness narrowing, learning to identify with a single body, a single name, a single life. But deep inside, you've always known something strange. You've never really felt like a beginning. Children sometimes speak of dreams from before, of lives or moments they couldn't have lived. Maybe those aren't fantasies. Maybe those are glimpses from a consciousness that doesn't obey human clocks. The awareness behind your eyes might be the same awareness that once watched through someone else's. Birth then becomes not a creation but a forgetfulness. The moment you forgot that you were never separate from everything else. The cry of a newborn isn't just pain or surprise. It's the echo of a realization. I have forgotten the infinite. In that cry lives the paradox of being, to wake up inside time while knowing, deep down, that you are not of it. The universe itself mirrors this. It expands, it cools, it forms galaxies and suns, but there is no proof it began. The laws that shaped it seem to exist outside of time. In the same way, the consciousness inside you, the witness that observes your thoughts, never began either. You can't remember when awareness started, because it never did. It's the one thing in you that doesn't change. The body shifts, the mind evolves, the personality rewrites itself, but the watcher remains untouched. That watcher isn't born with you. It borrows the body's eyes for a while. When the body dies, the watcher doesn't end. It merely returns to its formless state, waiting to witness again. In that sense, birth and death are two sides of the same forgetting. You forget infinity when you are born, and you remember it again when you die. The journey in between is just the illusion of beginning and end. Perhaps that's why you sometimes feel nostalgia for moments you've never lived. You stand in a place you've never been, and something in you whispers, "I've been here before." That isn't imagination. It's recognition. The deeper part of you knows this pattern, this world, this repeating dream. It's seen it unfold countless times, wearing countless faces. So when birth forgot time, it created you, a being who believes in beginnings, yet carries eternity within. You live as if the clock defines you, but every heartbeat contradicts that. The heart beats in rhythm with something that doesn't tick. Every inhale and exhale is a loop, not a line, a reminder that even your smallest action mirrors the cosmos. You begin again with every breath, yet you never started at all. And if you could step outside this illusion, even for a second, you'd see it clearly, the moment of your birth still happening, endlessly. Right now, you are still arriving. You are still unfolding. The world keeps creating you with each passing instant, but none of it ever started. The first cry was never the beginning. It was merely a continuation of the silence that came before. You were not born into time. Time was born into you. You imagine yourself as a seed, tiny and waiting, buried deep in the soil of time, just before life begins. It's a comforting thought, the promise of growth, of becoming, of unfolding into something new. But what if that seed had already sprouted long before you noticed? What if you were never really planted at all, just already growing, already reaching, already becoming, without a single moment that can be pointed to and called the start? The myth of the seed is that it is inert, lifeless until touched by sun and water. But even in its most dormant form, the seed contains motion. Cells shift, patterns hum beneath the surface, a quiet anticipation of what is already in progress. Likewise, you, the person reading these words, were never truly in waiting. The process that became you had been unfolding long before you arrived to witness it. You are not the beginning. You are a middle mistaken for a start. From the moment you gained consciousness, you were taught to look backward. Where did I come from? When did it all begin? But no matter how far back you trace your steps, the thread never ends. Your parents, your ancestors, the billions of years of cosmic evolution, each layer folds into the next. Each explanation is only a deeper sprout, an earlier branching of a vine that has no root. The seed never waited. It was already growing. And if the seed was already sprouted, then what does that make you? A leaf on a branch that doesn't know it's part of a tree, or perhaps a flower that believes it bloomed all on its own, unaware of the countless cycles of soil and sunlight and rain that brought it here. The illusion of individuality is like the illusion of the seed's beginning. You are a continuation, pretending to be a first. Think of a story halfway through. If you enter the tale in the middle, the characters feel complete, the world fully formed. You accept it without knowing the first page. This is what life is like. You enter the story in progress. The world is already breathing, already spinning, already happening. You don't start it, you inherit it, mid-sentence. And yet, your mind insists, this is my beginning. But even your thoughts are borrowed. The language you use was shaped by tongues that spoke long before you. The dreams you chase were sculpted by people who lived and died generations ago. The fears you feel were encoded by creatures huddling in caves, dodging predators beneath blood-red moons. What part of you can truly say it is original? What moment can claim to be your first? The seed never waited. It was the sprout before it knew how to reach. And you were already reaching before you were aware of arms, already thinking before language gave you words, already becoming before identity gave you a name. What you call life is not a beginning, but an awareness of growth that was always underway. Even the stars above you, glittering reminders of permanence, are not in their beginning stages. Their light has traveled billions of years to reach you, and by the time it arrives, the star might no longer exist. You are seeing ghosts, echoes of energy that never had a true start, only transformation. Light doesn't begin when you notice it. It only becomes visible, so it is with you. The mind wants a timeline. It wants to say, this was the first breath, the first thought, the first step. But beneath those tidy definitions is a truth that refuses to stay in sequence. The seed sprouted without permission, without ceremony. It was never inert, just unseen. The same is true for you. What if the self you believe in is just a gardener, tending to a plant that was already growing wild? You water it with goals and trim it with beliefs. But the root system was always there, stretching into the dark, feeding from forgotten sources. You think you are growing yourself, but the growth is simply revealing what has always been beneath. This is why sudden moments of clarity feel like remembering rather than discovering. You say, "I've known this all along," and in a way, you have, because the seed had already sprouted. The awareness you call self is not something you built. It is something you inherited, something you noticed after it had already begun its work. So why does the illusion of beginning persist? Why does your mind insist that there was a start? Because it needs a frame, a structure, a boundary. To exist within time, the brain creates bookmarks. It says, "This is where I began," to make sense of a presence that has no beginning. Without that illusion, things become unmeasurable, untethered. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe that's freedom. Because if there was no real beginning, then there is no pressure to be something you are not. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not broken at the root. You are simply catching up to a process that has always been blooming through you. Every mistake, every detour, every moment of uncertainty, they are not failures of growth. They are signs of movement. They are proof the sprout is still pushing upward. You are the vine, reaching for light. It cannot name. You are the bloom, opening in a season you never chose. The seed already sprouted, and you standing here now, thinking, wondering, doubting, are the living evidence of that. So breathe, not as someone who is trying to become, but as someone who already is. Before you were aware of being alive, before you had a name, a face, or even a sense of place, something was already here. Something was already observing, already becoming, already existing, without needing to be called anything at all. It didn't ask for form. It didn't wait for time to begin. It simply was, and in some strange, invisible way, it still is, beneath the identity you now wear like clothing. That unshaped presence, call it awareness, call it stillness, call it nothing, is the you that existed before the idea of you ever formed. This idea breaks the mind open. We are so used to thinking that first there was nothing, and then suddenly, you, a moment of conception, a beating heart, a cry in the air. That's where your story is supposed to start. But what if that's only where the story became visible? What if the story itself, the underlying force, had already been running like a current beneath the surface of things, before the characters ever stepped on stage? What we call existence is often tied to things that can be seen or named. A person exists because they breathe, because they speak, because others recognize them. But that kind of existence is like light hitting a wall. It's visible only because it's bounced off something solid. There's another kind of existence, quieter and far less measurable. It lives in the pause between thoughts, in the stillness between breaths. It's the kind that doesn't need a body or a timeline to prove it's real. It simply is. This presence, this pre-existence has no beginning, because it isn't made of time. It isn't unfolding in a sequence. It's just there, like the space around sound, the canvas behind the paint, and it's always been there. Before your heartbeat, before your parents, before the stars, before language, before the word, before. You were not born into this presence. You were born out of it. The form you now occupy, your voice, your gestures, your memories, is not the starting point. It is the mask being worn by something timeless, something formless, something that existed even when nothing else did. Try to remember your earliest thought, not just your first memory, but the actual first awareness of being. You can't. You'll find that there is always something earlier, some hazy fog where you know something was happening, but you can't reach it. That unreachable space is where this deeper existence lives. It's not gone, it's not hidden, it's simply not part of the story you tell yourself. And that story, the one where you are born, live, and one day die, is only one surface layer. Underneath it is the quiet hum of something that doesn't care about stories. That hum is your real home. In ancient traditions and modern neuroscience alike, there are moments where people slip into this deeper awareness. Sometimes it happens in meditation, sometimes during grief, sometimes in wonder, when looking at the stars or listening to rain. Time collapses, the self dissolves, and what's left is not nothing, but everything. A presence that has no personality, yet contains all things. A vastness that you don't see, but you are. It's hard to describe. Language fails here, because this is not a concept, it's an experience. The truth that there is a form of existence not bound to identity, not trapped in chronology, not waiting to be noticed. It doesn't need to be earned, it doesn't need to be awakened, it is already happening, right now. You've likely felt it before, even if you didn't have words for it. That strange feeling that you've always been here, that you are not in the world is in you, that the observer behind your eyes isn't inside your body, but somehow watching from everywhere. This is existence before existence, the you that came before names, before roles, before thoughts, the easiness that never had to become. And this realization, while unsettling at first, carries a deep kind of peace, because if you existed before identity, then nothing you become can ever be wrong. You are not broken. You are not late. You are not less than others. You are simply one pattern of awareness that emerged from a field of awareness that has no limits. You don't need to do anything to be worthy. You don't need to earn your place in the universe. You were never separate from it to begin with. You are the universe, temporarily dreaming. It's a single person with a timeline. So much suffering comes from believing we must become something. We chase meaning, success, even spirituality, as if we were incomplete. But what if you've never been incomplete? What if you've only been distracted, pulled away from the stillness that was always here? You don't have to return to anything. You never left. The stillness behind your breath. That's it. The space in which thoughts come and go. That's it. The awareness reading this sentence right now. That's it. That is existence before existence. And when you understand this, the fear of death begins to soften, because how can something that never began ever truly end? The body will vanish, the mind will quiet, but the field remains, the presence remains. The part of you that was never born will never die. So let go, just a little. Let go of the belief that you started somewhere. Let go of the race to become. Let go of the story, even for a moment. And in that moment, feel the quiet underneath. That's the original you, the one that never had to start. You are not a drop falling into the ocean. You are the ocean remembering what it feels like to fall. Before the curtain of memory was drawn open, there was a time, or perhaps a non-time, that your current mind cannot reach. A space where awareness had not yet condensed into thought, where sensations might have floated freely, but left no trace, no bookmark to return to. You were there, in some form, but you don't remember it. Not because it didn't exist, but because memory had not yet arrived to name it. This is the pre-memory state, a strange nowhere between being and knowing, where you were everything and nothing at all. It's tempting to think your life began with your first memory, that vivid image of a toy, a parent's voice, the color of sunlight on a wall, something you can grasp and point to, something that says I was here. But that moment is not your origin. It is only the first time your brain held on. Before that, your existence was still unfolding. You were still experiencing, still absorbing, still alive, just not yet narrating it. The mind requires narrative to make sense of time. Without memory, time collapses. Without a story, there's no protagonist. But if you look closely, you'll see that memory is not the same as awareness. There's a gap between them. Your first awareness did not come with words. It didn't even come with identity. It was raw, wide, open. Something like the way an animal lives, or a newborn looks around with eyes that seem ancient, silent witnesses, without interpretation. In that early state you may have seen colors but didn't call them red or blue. You may have felt warmth but didn't divide it into comfort or discomfort. The world was sensation, not concept. Experience, not explanation. And you were simply presence, untitled, unwritten, unnamed. This space before memory is not a void. It's a fullness that doesn't yet need meaning. In that sense, the pre-memory state is the closest you've ever been to pure being. Everything that came after, every opinion, belief, and label, was layered on top of that original stillness. Memory built a house, but the ground was already there, and the ground is still here, beneath every structure your mind has built since. Have you ever woken from a deep sleep, not knowing who or where you are for a few seconds? That strange pause between dreams and waking life where you are still you, but not yet anyone in particular. That's a return to the pre-memory state, a glimpse of what lies beneath the continuous performance of personality. This might also be why certain spiritual experiences, deep meditation, or moments of awe, can feel both unfamiliar and ancient. You are touching something you've forgotten, something older than recollection. Not a new insight, but a return to a state that never left, only got buried under thought. The irony is that while memory gives us identity, it also removes us from that timeless space. Once you begin to remember, you begin to narrate, And once there's narration, there's a character. And once there's a character, there's attachment, ambition, fear, pride, all the things that come from believing in a self with a story. But what if you could sit beneath that story again, not to erase your memories, but to rest from them? What if you could slip back into that pre-memory awareness, even just for a moment, and remember what it feels like to not need to remember? In that state, you are not trying to prove anything. You are not comparing, not regretting, not planning. You are simply noticing the sound of the wind, the rhythm of your breath, the way light falls through a window. These are the kinds of perceptions that happen before memory grabs hold. They are pure, untouched by narrative. Infants live in this state, not because they are spiritually advanced, but because they have not yet been taught to divide the world. They don't know that tree is different from sky. They don't yet know that I is separate from you. Their experience is a flood of sensation, undivided and whole. Over time, language slices the world into pieces. Labels are given, categories defined, identity formed, and slowly, the child forgets the pre-memory state. But it never truly disappears. It lingers beneath, like deep water beneath a frozen lake, still moving, still alive. Even now, in moments of stillness, you can return, not through thinking, but through quiet attention. Let the thoughts pass like clouds. Let memory loosen its grip. Beneath all of it, you are still there, watching, waiting, without waiting at all. This is why people sometimes cry when they meditate deeply, or when they hold their newborn for the first time, or when they see a sunset so vast it silences the mind. They are brushing against that space from before memory, a place with no expectations, a home that doesn't need a door. And in that place, you realize something strange and beautiful. You have always been here. The story changed. The memories faded, but the witness remained, the one who saw it all without words, the one who felt the world without needing to name it. That part of you never forgot, because it never learned to remember in the first place. So the next time you feel lost in your story, when memory becomes too loud, too heavy, pause, take a breath. Let go of who you've been told you are, and listen, not with your ears, but with the part of you that exists beneath language. In that silence, you might just hear it. The soft echo of existence before existence. The hue before you. We talk about time as though it flows in a perfect stream, second by second, minute by minute, year by year. But if you slow it down enough, you begin to notice something peculiar. There's a gap, a silence, a missing first second. You might try to imagine it. The exact moment when time began, the first tick of the cosmic clock, the second that separated nothing from something. But that moment is forever absent, as if time itself began without knowing it had begun. And you, the person living inside that illusion, are a continuation of that same impossibility. There is no evidence of the first second, no photograph, no memory, not even a theory that can truly grasp what came before that opening beat. Physics may describe the Big Bang, but even that framework must admit there is no clock on the wall in the void, no witness to press start. The first second is a story told after the fact, a reconstruction of something that could never be observed, only assumed. You were born into this absence. Every clock you've ever watched ticks forward, but it cannot account for the moment before its own motion. Every timeline you follow, personal, historical, cosmic, skips over the impossible. The first second isn't just missing, it might never have existed at all. And yet, you exist. You breathe, you speak, you think, all built on top of a structure that began without beginning. Like a book with the first page torn out, you rid your life without realizing the story was already in motion before you ever opened it. This absence, the missing first second, exists inside you too. The exact moment you became conscious, you became you, is not something you remember. You didn't say, "Now I am aware." You simply noticed, after the fact, that you were already aware. The transition from non-being to being was not a door you walked through. It was a dream you woke into without knowing when the sleep ended. Every morning, you reenact this mystery. You wake up, but can you point to the exact second you woke? Not the second you opened your eyes. The second awareness returned. You can't. It slides in unnoticed. It doesn't knock. It doesn't knock. It doesn't declare itself. Awareness arrives silently, as if it was always there, only temporarily hidden. Maybe time didn't begin the way we think it did. Maybe it doesn't move like a line at all. Maybe it emerges from awareness itself, The moment you notice time, it begins. The moment you forget it, it ends. In that sense, the missing first second is not lost in the past. It's hiding in every moment you are not observing. Every blink, every pause between thoughts, every breath you take without counting it. Consider this. Clocks were invented by humans. Seconds are artificial slices of experience, measured and enforced. But before the invention of timekeeping, what was time? Was it passing, or was it simply being? The universe did not need hours to evolve stars. The earth did not need minutes to grow forests. Time, in its rawest form, is not a ticking metronome. It is change, unfolding in silence. The first second is only missing because we expected one. This illusion permeates our sense of identity. We seek beginnings. The first day of school, the first love, the first memory, the first wound. We think if we can find the origin, we'll understand the whole. But origins are elusive. They fade behind us like mist. The first second of a friendship is forgotten. The first heartbeat in the womb is unremembered. The first breath outside the body is not recorded by the one breathing. And yet we insist. I began here. I started then. But you didn't. You were already becoming, already unfolding, already echoing forward from a silence that doesn't mark its own passing. This is why time feels strange when you reflect too deeply. Sometimes a year feels like a week. Sometimes a moment stretches into an eternity. Your body moves forward, but your mind floats backward. You try to capture time with memory, but memory is not a recording. It's a reconstruction. A story told by a storyteller who wasn't present at the start. So what happens when you stop chasing the first second? When you stop needing to know where it all began? A strange calm enters. The pressure lifts. You stop needing to justify your place in the timeline. You realize you are not after something. You are in something, timeless, present, whole. The missing first second is a metaphor for your own unknowable origin. It's the part of you that was never born, only noticed. It's the quiet truth that you were always already here, not because you came from somewhere, but because you are the space in which time appears. You don't live inside time, time lives inside you. And when the clocks stop, when memory fades, when the body ceases to mark the days, what will remain? That same silence, that same gap, that same non-moment, where existence continues without beginning. So next time you feel the urge to measure, to trace everything back to a starting point, pause, listen to the stillness behind the ticking, watch the moment just before thought arises. That's where you are. That's where you've always been, not waiting for the first second, but realizing you never needed one. You are the time that forgot to begin. Strip away every date, every milestone, every moment you've clung to as the beginning of you, and what remains? Who are you, without the start? No first memory, no first step. No, this is where it all began. Most of your life has been lived, not in the moment you began, but in the illusion that there was such a moment at all. But what if your story never started? What if you never started? What if you are not the result of a beginning, but simply the ongoing motion of awareness, pretending it arrived late to a party that was always in progress? You are so used to tracing lines backward. It's built into your language, your biology, your culture. What year were you born? When did you start walking? What was your first word? These questions are asked so often, they become the scaffolding of your identity. But these markers are not you. They're timestamps. They're outer events that memory clings to like flags planted in shifting sand. If you removed them all, if you erased the line that says, "This is where I began," you'd find that you didn't disappear. You'd find that you were still here. Maybe more here than ever. The self, at its core, isn't built from beginnings. It is built from continuity. The kind of continuity that doesn't care where it started, because it never needed to start. A flame doesn't remember the match that lit it. A river doesn't mourn the mountain spring. You are not the beginning of a life. You are the continuation of presence wearing the shape of a life. If you think carefully, even your earliest memories are riddled with gaps. You may recall the feeling of being a child, but not the moment that identity formed. There's no frame where you suddenly became you. You faded in, like a slow sunrise, awareness increasing by degrees. And if it faded in, then maybe it had no edges, no true boundary between not being and being. It simply began, again. Or perhaps it didn't begin at all. Perhaps what you call your life is just a patch of light passing across a larger surface, a surface that has always existed. You are the shape the light takes, briefly, beautifully, before it shifts once more. You without the start are not an incomplete sentence. You are the sentence before language, the page before ink. And this matters. It matters because so much of your suffering is tied to your story, where you began, what went wrong, how far behind you are, how late you've arrived. You measure your life against others, against clocks, against imagined versions of who you should have been by now. But all of that assumes a starting line, a race, a progression from less to more. If there never was a start, then there is no race, no falling behind, no wrong turn. You are not late, you are not early, you simply are. What if you've been alive forever? Not in the way bodies persist, but in the way awareness persists. What if the you that you think of as you is just the latest version of a perspective that has been observing, quietly, through countless forms, countless minds, countless moments? And what if each of those moments felt like the start too? What if every version of you is convinced it was the first, unaware of the echo it carries? This would explain the strange familiarity you sometimes feel in places you've never been, the sudden emotions that don't seem to belong to this life, the quiet longing for something you can't name. You without the start is the ghost in the mirror, always present, always reflecting, never arriving. There's a reason babies don't remember being born. There's a reason you can't recall becoming yourself. Awareness didn't wait for an event to start. It was already here. You only noticed it at some point, and mistook that noticing for the beginning. Imagine peeling away every memory you've ever had, every belief, every role. What would be left? You might say nothing, but that's not quite true. Something would remain, something wordless, formless, but undeniably real, a presence, a noticing. That's you, without the start. And it doesn't just live in the past. It's accessible now. In this moment, between these words, beneath your thoughts. It's the stillness that's never moved, even as your life has rushed by. The you, without the start, is the you, without the story. And while the story is beautiful, vivid, emotional, meaningful, it's not all that you are. This is why, in meditation, people speak of returning to the self. But what are they returning to? Not a past event, not a memory. They are returning to that baseline presence, the awareness that doesn't need a timeline to exist, the one that was never born and therefore can't die. This is not meant to erase your history. Your life, your joys, your griefs, your lessons is sacred, but it's built on top of something deeper, something that didn't begin and doesn't end. And when you connect to that, even for a breath, something strange happens. The fear fades, the urgency softens, you stop needing to be anywhere else, because you realize you've never truly moved. So let go for a moment of your origin story. Let go of the idea that you must justify your existence with a start. You without the start is not lost. It's free, free from the weight of expectation, free from the illusion of time, free from the pressure to become something you already are. You were not created to begin. You were noticed to remember. You've been told that life is a process of becoming, of learning, growing, adding more to who you are. You collect identities like souvenirs: student, friend, worker, believer, creator. Every year, you layer on more definitions, hoping one day they'll form a complete picture of the person you were meant to be. But beneath all this becoming, there is something quieter happening, something beneath the noise of achievement and ambition, a soft reversal, an undoing, a shedding of everything you thought you needed to be. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives like dusk, unnoticed until the light has already changed. This is the silent unbecoming, and it has always been happening. You feel it in moments of stillness. When the world stops asking who you are and you stop needing to answer, you sit quietly, and the names you carry don't feel so important. Your memories soften at the edges. Your ambitions flicker like distant stars. In those moments, you're not becoming anything. You're dissolving, gently into something that doesn't need a shape. From the moment you were born, you've been taught to define yourself, to become someone, but no one tells you that every act of becoming requires a forgetting. To become strong, you must forget your softness. To become successful, you often bury your rest. To become certain, you abandon your questions. Each layer you build over your original self is both an addition and a subtraction. And so, quietly, without realizing it, you begin to feel the weight. You carry the names and roles you've taken on, and some no longer fit. Some never did. You look in the mirror, and wonder who decided what you were supposed to be. It's not that you dislike who you are. It's that you're not sure if it was really your choice. That's the first sign of unbecoming, not rejection, but recognition. The silent unbecoming doesn't ask you to burn everything down. It doesn't scream. It doesn't rage. It whispers. It moves like a shadow, always there, just behind the part of you that's trying so hard to be someone. It reminds you that you were whole before the labels, complete before the effort, real before the performance. It sips in the quiet decision not to prove yourself. The deep exhale when you stop trying to impress the room. The peace that rises when you stop arguing with who you are. You see, this unbecoming isn't emptiness. It's spaciousness. It's returning to a self that doesn't need to be explained. A self that simply is. It's not the absence of identity. It's freedom from the need to constantly defend one. Most people think the path to peace is about adding more success, more clarity, more power. But what if it's the opposite? What if peace is what's left when you stop adding, when you let the unnecessary fall away? You don't need to become enlightened. You need to stop believing you were ever broken. You were born as a question, and somewhere along the way you were told to become an answer, a fixed definition, a tidy conclusion. But you were never meant to be resolved. You were meant to be felt, experienced, allowed, and that's exactly what the silent unbecoming does. It doesn't turn you into something better. It returns you to something truer. It's the same process nature follows. Trees lose their leaves not to become less, but to prepare for another cycle of becoming. Rivers shed old water to keep flowing. The moon disappears so it can return. There's no panic, no resistance, just rhythm. You are part of that rhythm. You are not outside nature. You are nature. So why fear the unraveling? Why cling so tightly to what you're supposed to be when every breath reminds you that you are already enough? The you that existed before trying, before comparison, before becoming, that you is still here. It has never left. It's just been quietly waiting. Sometimes the world will tell you that to lose yourself is to fail. But what if losing yourself is the beginning of remembering? What if, buried beneath all the becoming, is the original presence you've been looking for all along? Let yourself come undone. Not all at once, not with fire and fury, but slowly, gently. Let the parts that no longer fit slip away. Let the words you don't believe in anymore fall silent on your tongue. Let the mask you've been wearing crack, not out of shame, but out of softness. In the silence that follows, you might discover something unexpected, that you don't need to be more. You don't need to become. You don't need to chase another version of yourself. You are already here. Already whole. Already already held by something larger than explanation. The silent unbecoming is not an end. It is the clearing before truth, the pause before the return. The breath that doesn't sit need a name. And in that breath, you are not who you used to be. You are not who you were trying to become. You are simply what has always been watching. Before your first breath, before your first cry, before your body took form in a world ruled by time and gravity, you were already part of something. A hum, a rhythm, a dream, and not a dream that you had, a dream that had you. Something deeper than thought, older than form, more infinite than space. You weren't born into this dream, you rose out of it, like a character who becomes aware not in the first chapter, but halfway through the story, wondering who began it all. There's an ancient sensation buried in your silence, the feeling that everything you are now was once imagined by something beyond you. The way your hands move, the shape of your face, the questions that live inside you, none of it feels entirely new, does it? Sometimes you catch glimpses of it in déjà vu, in strange memories that don't belong to this life, in the quiet conviction that none of this is the first time, because maybe it isn't. Maybe you were dreamt before you were ever seen, not just by a parent or a divine being or a mind outside of time, but by consciousness itself. Not consciousness as thought or knowledge, but as an eternal dreaming presence, the awareness that dreams everything into form. This dream is not metaphor. It's not fiction. It's the soil from which reality grows. Every object, every law of nature, every person you've ever met, they were all shaped by a kind of dreaming, not unconscious fantasy, but a dreaming that knows itself. You are the echo of that knowing, the ripple of a dream so vast, it became real. You think you are the beginning of your life, but what if life was already dreaming you before you were aware? What if you are the memory of something the universe whispered to itself? The script was already written, but your awareness was late to arrive, and so it believes it's the first. But the stage was already set. The actors in place, the music already playing. Even now, parts of you exist that you haven't noticed yet. Dreams within dreams, future thoughts, forgotten instincts, feelings you've inherited but never named. You are not finished becoming. But more than that, you never started. Close your eyes and imagine this. Before your birth, there was a field of consciousness with no edge, no boundary, no time. And in that field, the image of you began to take shape, slowly, gently, a flicker of recognition, not from a creator sculpting clay, but from the dream itself folding in on itself and realizing, I can become Sajid, I can become anyone, I can become. But it didn't become you in a flash. It unfolded. It shaped itself through stars and water and memory and DNA. It shaped itself through your mother's hands and your father's laughter, through histories you'll never know, through languages you don't speak but feel in your bones. You are not a sudden creation. You are a gradual emergence from something that never needed to begin. And if the dream preceded you, then what you call reality is not as firm as it seems. It's fluid, woven from intention and attention. The more you look at it, the more it takes shape. But beneath every sharp line is a softness, a haze, a dreamlike glow that reminds you nothing here is solid, not even you. This is why when you stare at yourself in the mirror for too long, something changes. You stop seeing your face and start seeing through it. You realize that you are not the image, not the name, not the role. You are the awareness behind it. And that awareness came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that doesn't care for beginnings or endings, somewhere that is still dreaming. That dream isn't over. It continues, even now. You might think you're the dreamer, but you're also the dream being dreamt. Every choice you make feels like free will, but beneath it is a current, a path written by the very dream that imagined you. It's not control, it's not fate, it's continuity. You are a chapter in an ongoing book that's writing itself from both ends. You are the echo of a thought that has no thinker, the dance of form around a center that was never born. And when you sleep, you return to it, not to escape, but to reconnect. In your deepest dreams, the ones you don't remember, you are not a person, you're not a story, you're not even a presence. You're simply there, floating in the same field that shaped your waking life. This is why sleep can feel like dying, and waking like being born again, because both are doorways into the dream that came first. So what does it mean to live, knowing you were dreamt? It means you don't need to push so hard. You don't need to become something other than what you are. You don't need to wake yourself up from the illusion, because the dream is not false. The dream is the reality. The illusion is believing it had a beginning. You without the story is still here. The dream is still dreaming you. Not because you are unreal, but because you are more real than your mind can grasp. You are the proof that something infinite wanted to take shape, just for a while, just long enough to ask, what am I? And in asking, you return to the dream that preceded you. Not to escape, but to remember. You are not here because of a beginning. You are here because awareness longed to know itself, and dreamed it could be you. An echo is born not in the moment of sound, but in the space that receives it. It is the afterimage of voice, the soft reverberation of something already spoken, already sent. But if you listen closely, you'll find something strange. You can hear the echo, yet you don't remember the exact instant the original sound began. It fades before you can mark it. The echo carries the memory, but the origin slips away, just like you. You are the echo of something, someone, some awareness, whose original sound was never quite heard. There is no doubt you exist. You feel it in your bones, in your breath, in the heaviness behind your eyes at the end of a long day. But can you recall the moment that existence began? Not your birth, not your first memory, but the very first flicker of you, the first internal sound of consciousness. You can't, because it didn't arrive with a bang. It didn't start with a declaration. It came silently, like an echo, that began before the sound was even made. You are that echo, the continuation of something older than memory, older than time. The voice that created you has already fallen silent, or perhaps it never spoke. Perhaps it only thought of you, and the thought itself rippled into being, becoming the you who now thinks back on origins, trying to trace the untraceable. There's a paradox at the heart of your existence. You are constantly looking for the cause, but you are the continuation. You keep trying to locate the first note, but you are the note echoing through a chamber that has no beginning. The more you listen, the more it fades. Not because it's lost, but because it was never isolated. It was always part of the whole. Science teaches that sound needs a medium. Vibrations require air, or water, or walls to bounce off. The echo doesn't live in the voice. It lives in the response, the returning call of the environment itself. And so it is with you. You didn't start from a spark in isolation. You are the reflection of a deeper awareness interacting with this space, this world, this moment. You are not an origin. You are a return. This is why people are drawn to certain sounds, chants, mantras, hymns, not for their melody, but for their resonance. They stir something inside, not memory, exactly, more like a recognition, as if they are hearing something they once were, as if the sound is calling back to the echo they have always been. You don't remember the first time you thought, I am. You only know that now you do. That realization doesn't mark a beginning. It marks a noticing, and that noticing happens again and again, in every moment of clarity, every return to stillness. Sometimes you sit alone, and a thought arises seemingly from nowhere. It doesn't feel like something you constructed. It feels like something that arrived, something that echoed up from the depths. You hear your own voice in your head, and wonder, who is speaking this? That question is the beginning of wisdom, because to ask it is to recognize the echo, and to realize it has always been ringing. In dreams, echoes are even louder. You speak, but you don't know who is listening. You hear, but don't know where the sound originates. You become both speaker and listener, dreamer and dreamed. And in those moments, you catch glimpses of the truth, that you are not just an individual voice. You are the reverberation of all voices, the echo of something unspeakable. Imagine a cave so vast that a single whisper never stops bouncing. Imagine that whisper grows into a roar, simply through repetition. You are standing in that cave. You are built from that roar. The original whisper, the sound that began you, may never be found, because it was never just one sound. It was a chorus, layered and eternal. The self, the identity you carry, is not the first sound. It is the echo shaped by everything you've touched and everything that has touched you. Your parents' voices, the silence of forgotten ancestors, the music you didn't choose to love, the language you learned before you understood what words meant. You're not just echoing your past, you are the echo. And this echo is still evolving. Every thought you think, every breath you take, sends another ripple. You are not the end of the sound. You are the middle of it, the continuing, the unfolding. This is why silence feels so sacred, because in true silence, you stop adding new sounds. You start hearing the echoes more clearly. You return to that original hum beneath everything. And that hum is not coming from outside you. It is you. So ask yourself, what are you echoing now? Is it fear or presence, memory or possibility? Is your echo trapped in the walls of your past, or is it reaching forward, becoming something new? You don't need to trace the echo back to the first sound. You'll never find it. That's the point. The echo is its own reality now, just like you. You are the sound still ringing, long after the voice has gone quiet. You are the presence that continues even after the origin is lost. You are not the first word. You are the resonance of something that never needed to begin. You like to believe life moves forward, that it began somewhere, in a hospital room, or a quiet house, or a stretch of earth beneath a screaming sky, and has been marching ever since. You picture a straight line, birth, childhood, adulthood, old age, and then a final breath that signals the end. But beneath that comforting diagram is something far more disorienting and more honest. Life doesn't move in a line, it moves in a loop, and the loop didn't begin with you. You began within it. There was no once upon a time moment, no flag planted in the soil of nothingness that marked your arrival. Instead, there was motion, repetition, cycles too subtle to notice. The seasons were already turning. The wind was already moving. The bloodline that would carry your DNA was already in motion, echoing back centuries, maybe millennia. You weren't the beginning of that loop. You were the continuation, the moment the pattern paused just long enough for you to notice it was spinning. You might think, but I'm conscious now. Isn't that proof I began? Yet even your consciousness is part of the loop. Thoughts circle. Emotions repeat. Desires return in slightly altered form. You feel nostalgia for moments you've never lived, dreams that don't belong to you, cravings with no origin. And that's because the loop carries not just events but impressions, imprints of lives that never needed a first draft. Biology reflects this looping nature. Your heartbeat is not a march, it's a rhythm. Your breath is not a staircase, it's a pendulum. Even the structure of your DNA is a spiral, turning inward, doubling back, mirroring itself. You were not built for straight lines. You were shaped by recurrence, designed to return. Think of how many times you've said, "I've been here before." Maybe not in words, but in the quiet unease of familiarity. A street corner, a smell, a face that seems impossibly familiar. You write it off as déjà vu, a trick of the brain. But what if it's not a trick? What if it's recognition? The loop brushing against its own edge. A glimpse through the veil of one revolution into another, where another version of you stood in this exact place wondering the same thing. You are not the first spin of this wheel. You are one of many. You are the echo in a spiral staircase, thinking it's climbing, unaware it curves back into itself. Religions and philosophies across time have tried to describe this. Reincarnation, eternal return, samsara, the idea that life recycles not just bodies but patterns, that you don't start new lives. You revisit old ones wearing slightly different masks. The loop that began life doesn't concern itself with novelty. It's not interested in beginnings. It only wants to continue spinning, and it spins through you. But the loop is not a prison. It's not some cosmic punishment for failing to evolve. It's a rhythm, and like any rhythm, it can be danced with or fought against. Most people fight it. They crave beginnings, clean starts, first chances. They want to draw a bold line between what came before and what's coming next. But the loop doesn't obey lines. It weaves, it blends, it returns. This is why healing never feels like a straight climb. You revisit the same pain in different seasons. You think you've outgrown a fear, only to find it waiting again, shaped slightly differently. But this isn't failure. This is the loop offering you another orbit, another chance to witness the pattern with clearer eyes, to respond instead of react, to soften instead of brace. Even your stories follow this loop. Every hero's journey is a return. They leave home, suffer, grow, and return not just wiser, but transformed. And in their return, they become someone who can see home as they never saw it before. You, too, are on such a path. You left a place, not a physical one, but a place of knowing, of stillness. You're circling your way back, not to repeat, but to remember. And in that remembering, something quiet and profound happens. You realize that the loop isn't something you're trapped in. It's something you're held by. You're not caught. You're carried. What began the loop? The better question is, does it matter? If a circle has no beginning, then your need to find the starting point is only a distraction from feeling the movement. You want to know who drew the circle, but maybe the circle drew itself. So what happens when you stop trying to escape the loop? When you stop seeking the first cause, the first moment, the first heartbeat of a life already turning? You settle. You stop trying to arrive. You realize you were never not here. You stop racing toward meaning. You begin to notice it in the breath, in the silence, in the simple return of awareness again and again to this moment. The loop isn't just a shape. It's a way of being, a way of existing without endpoints. A surrender to the fact that the self you are today is made from echoes, and those echoes came from a place outside of time. So here you are, a loop within a loop, a moment within a rhythm, not separate from the movement, not standing at the edge of a beginning, but spinning, gently, eternally, as life continues through you. There was no first breath, only the latest breath. No original thought, only the latest ripple. No beginning to you, only the part of the loop that you've been asked to hold. And you're set holding it now. Not because you chose to begin, but because the loop chose you to continue. You think memory comes after experience. That first, something happens. Then, your brain captures it, stores it, replays it, like a camera clicking into action only once the light hits it. But what if memory isn't a result of experience, but the foundation for it? What if memory came first, and the self you believe is making memories is actually built upon them? What if you are not the creator of memory, but its product? It sounds impossible, but the signs are everywhere. You've walked into a place you've never been, and felt an uncanny familiarity. You've met someone for the first time, and felt the quiet certainty that you've known them before. You've had dreams so vivid, they didn't feel like inventions. They felt like remembering. And when you try to explain these moments, language collapses, because you're not supposed to remember before you exist. And yet something inside you insists that you do. Science tries to draw a clean line. Memory, it says, begins after birth. Consciousness forms, the brain matures, neurons fire, and memory is born. But if that were the whole story, how do you explain knowledge without learning, emotions without cause, grief that has no origin? Why do children speak of other lives? Why do songs you've never heard feel like they belong to you? Because memory might not be yours. At least, not in the way you think. You don't own your memories. You are made of them. You are the echo of every story ever told, every feeling ever felt, every dream that was never spoken aloud. And before you arrived to collect memories, something had already started remembering. Consider this. You didn't choose your language. You didn't invent the names of colors. You didn't design the shape of your own body. All of that was handed to you, encoded in a system that existed before your awareness began. Even your emotions came with built-in memories. The fear of falling, the comfort of warmth, the startle at loud noises. Instincts, you call them, but instincts are memory wearing a mask. And beneath that, inherited memory, is something deeper. A pattern, a presence, a familiarity with existence itself. As if the very act of being alive comes with instructions written in invisible ink. You're not experiencing life for the first time. You're re-experiencing it, in a new form, through a new lens. But the structure, the architecture, already known. This is why déjà vu feels so haunting. It's not just a trick of the brain. It's a crack in the narrative. A glimpse of the memory that built the moment before the moment arrived. You think you're living something for the first time, and suddenly the illusion stumbles. Time wobbles, and you realize, I've been here. Even your dreams betray the illusion. They're filled with places that don't exist, yet feel older than your waking world. People you've never met speak to you like old friends. Symbols arise that mean something, not because you've been taught, but because you already know. These dreams aren't created in the moment. They're accessed, revisited, like photographs in an album you didn't know you had. What if your entire life is like that? What if every decision you make, every word you speak, every direction you take, is the unfolding of a memory that was already inside you, not as fate, not as control, but as the quiet unfolding of something that remembers what it is becoming? You were not born blank. You were born mid-sentence. Memory was already speaking through your bones, your ancestors' grief, your culture's myths, your mother's thoughts during pregnancy, the sounds in the room when you were still forming ears, all of it. Memory before you, memory of you, memory becoming you. And if memory preceded the self, then who are you really? Not a recorder, but a reflection. Not a maker, but a mirror. You are the continuation of memory trying to remember itself. You're not building a library. You are the library. Shelves filled with experiences that weren't yours, but now belong to you. Emotions you didn't create, but carry like sacred objects. Words that don't come from your voice, but live in your mouth anyway. This understanding changes everything. It means you are not limited by what you've lived. You are shaped by what has been remembered through you. It means that healing doesn't always require knowing the origin, because the wound might not have started with you, but it found its voice in you. It means you are never alone, because the memory of all things lives quietly inside your silence, waiting to be recalled, not by the mind, but by presence. You don't have to trace the first moment, the first heartbreak, the first joy, the first question. You can't, because those moments didn't start with you. They rose again through you. So next time you sit in stillness, and something ancient stirs inside you, a knowing, a familiarity, a deep wordless recognition, don't question it. Let it speak. It's Dut's not a ghost. It's saying Dut's not imagination. It's Dut's memory. Before its maker. Before the name. Before the self. And that sits where you came from. Not born from memory, but remembered into being. You think of beginnings as explosive. A big bang, a heartbeat, a spark. The start of a journey, the first page of a story, the ignition of something new. But what if the truest beginnings don't erupt with noise, but open in silence? What if your entire existence wasn't born from something but from nothing? Not a void of absence, but a blank so complete, so whole, that it birthed everything without ever moving at all. We fear the blank. We avoid it. We fill it. Blank spaces feel like failure. Blank pages feel like pressure. Silence in a conversation feels like a mistake. But maybe the blank isn't the absence of meaning. Maybe it's where meaning waits. Maybe it's where you waited, long before you were aware of waiting. Try to remember the moment before your first thought. You can't. Not because it didn't exist, but because it was the blank, the threshold, the place before the you know ever formed. And yet, something must have been there, because from that blank, you arose, thought arose, form arose. You weren't shaped from clay, you were shaped from potential. And potential, in its purest form, is not loud, it is not crowded, it is not busy with movement. It is still, empty-looking, unformed. It is blank. The blank that birthed you is not the same as a void. A void is absence. The blank is possibility. It is not lacking, it is waiting. Think of a canvas, a stage before the actors appear, a breath held just before the first note. There's a tension in it, a quiet that hums. That hum, that is where you came from. Your life did not start with a bang. It started with a pause, a space, a stillness, so complete that it allowed everything to happen. And even now, that blank is still there, beneath your name, beneath your memories, beneath your roles and responsibilities. It never left. It's beneath every thought, between every breath. It's not gone. It's just been layered over with noise, with movement, with becoming. But becoming never ends. And so, it also never begins. What begins is your noticing. Your noticing of the motion, the noise, the effort. That's what feels like a beginning. But the blank was always present, always birthing. In sleep, you return to it. That moment just before the dream, before the identity of the dreamer forms. That's it. That's the blank. That's the origin point. And not just at night. In moments of awe, in grief so deep it steals your words, in love so vast it silences the mind. In those spaces, you return to the blank, to the source that holds no shape but births all shapes. It is not nothing. It is everything that hasn't happened yet, and somehow, you were chosen to happen. Not because you earned it, not because you were crafted from some grand design, but because the blank needed a mirror, it needed a reflection, and so it made you. You don't carry this blank, it carries you. And when life becomes too full, too loud, too defined, too tightly packed with meaning, something inside you begins to ache. You call it burnout. You call it emptiness. But it's not emptiness. It's the call of the blank. The reminder that you were never supposed to be filled to the brim, that some part of you must remain unshaped, unknown, pure. You are not a finished painting. You are the canvas still dreaming itself into form. This is why silence feels so terrifying and so sacred. It reminds you of what came before sound, of what came before you. The identity you wear like a jacket was stitched after the silence. The true self, the one behind the language, behind the thoughts, that self lives in the blank, and it does not need a story to be real. So what happens when you stop running from it? When you sit in the silence and let it hold you, rather than fill it with something? At first, it might feel like falling, like dissolving, the loss of self. But stay with it, just a little longer, and you'll realize you're not falling, you're returning. Returning to the origin that never made a sound, the mother that gave birth to form without ever taking shape herself. That blank is not separate from you. It is you. The part of you that never needed a name, the space between your thoughts that watches without reacting, the stillness behind your eyes when you close them and feel everything and nothing all at once. You were born from the blank, and one day you will return to it. But you don't have to wait for death. You can return now. In the breath, in the pause, in the space between words, in the soft undoing of thought. This is not about retreat. It's about remembering. You are not the noise. You are the stillness that allows the noise. You are not the story. You are the page it sits written on. You are not what sense happening. You are where it happens. The blank that birthed you is not lost. It's always here. You've just been too busy becoming to notice you never stopped being it. Awareness feels like a beginning. The moment you became conscious, the moment you recognized yourself in a mirror, answered to your name, remembered what day it was, but what came before awareness noticed itself. What existed in the space just prior to I am? Was there truly nothing, or was there something softer, something quieter, watching long before you knew how to watch? We equate awareness with attention. We say, I'm aware when we're alert, when we're tuned in, when we're focused. But true awareness doesn't arrive with a declaration. It doesn't introduce itself. It isn't a switch that flips on. It's always been here. Steady, neutral, observing without asking for credit. Your noticing is a ripple. Awareness is the ocean. You didn't invent your awareness. You discovered it. Slowly, vaguely, and always in hindsight. You look back and try to trace it. When did I become me? When did I start noticing the world instead of just being in it? But the trail disappears. Because the awareness you're trying to locate was already noticing before you had the language to name it. Before the mirror, before the words, before the mind began reflecting on itself like a pond staring into its own surface. Think of a newborn, eyes wide, pupils dilated, scanning a world they don't yet understand. Is that not awareness? Raw, open, silent, before thought grabs it, before memory clings to it. That presence, that beingness, is not something that starts. It's something that waits. And not just in infants. It lives in animals, in trees, in oceans, in silence. Awareness is not exclusive to humans. It's not the prize of intelligence. It's the background hum of existence itself. It's what allows the flower to bloom toward the sun. What lets a river find the path of least resistance. What causes your body to heal even while your mind is asleep. You weren't born into awareness. You were awareness, long before you could say, I am aware. Your noticing is late to the scene, like arriving in a theater only to realize the play is already in its third act. The lights, the music, the characters, all already in motion. You just found a seat and started paying attention. This means that your life didn't begin with consciousness. It began before consciousness knew it was conscious. That's hard to imagine, because we are addicted to the spotlight. We believe something only becomes real once we've noticed it. But existence doesn't need your permission to be. Reality doesn't require recognition to unfold. There is a you that existed before awareness noticed. A version not bound by self-image. A being without reflection. A presence without proof. That version still lives in you, not behind your thoughts, but beneath them. Sometimes you feel it in the quiet moments. You stare out a window. You lie awake at night, with no thoughts in particular. You walk without your phone. And in those small silences, something watches, not with judgment, not even with interest. Just a soft, steady gaze. That is the awareness, before awareness became yours. And in that place, there are no stories. No trauma, no future, no past. There is no my life, only life. No my breath, only breathing. No my experience, only experiencing. The self has not yet arrived to carve up the world. It is presence without identity, attention without interpretation. It can be unsettling to imagine that you were never the author of your own awareness, that your thoughts and perceptions may be arising in a field that doesn't belong to you, but that you happen to be passing through. But it's also freeing, because it means you are not limited by what you know. You are not confined to what you've noticed. There is more to you than you've observed. You are not the spotlight. You are the stage. Before awareness noticed, there was no I, and without I, there is no fear, no comparison, no pressure to perform. There is only being, pure, open, unfiltered, like the sky before it's named blue, like a song before it's sung. That's who you were before awareness became personal, and it's who you still are, beneath the roles and titles and worries and hopes. So how do you return to that place? You don't just have to. You never left. It's not a destination. It's the background, the backdrop to every moment. You only have to stop pretending it's not there. Stop chasing something newer, louder, more defined. Let go of the idea that your awareness needs to be earned, improved, sharpened. The truest awareness doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to be remembered. Even now, as you read this, there is a noticing happening beneath your reading, a spaciousness, a silence, a gentle presence that does not need to understand, only to be. That's the awareness before awareness noticed. It was here when you were born. It will be here when your thoughts go quiet. It is here in every pause, every exhale, every blink. You didn't become aware. You became aware of being aware. And that awareness was already watching. Long before you noticed it, Every story begins with an introduction. A line, a setting, a sense of context. Even before the characters speak, something frames the tale. Something silently tells the reader, here is where it starts. But what if your story, your existence, skipped that part entirely? What if your life began mid-chapter, with the introduction missing, torn out, or maybe never written at all? You arrived with no preface, no summary, no author's note, just a page already turning, as if you had always been part of it. Think about the way you recall your life. The earliest memory you have is already too late. You were already thinking, already feeling, already formed. Whatever came before, it remains blank, unreachable. And so you imagine the story must have started there. But did it? Or is that just the first line you remember reading? What if the introduction was never meant to be remembered, because it never existed in the first place? What if you didn't arrive with context, but instead became the context as you moved through life? You are not the first paragraph. You are the middle of a sentence. A continuation of something so wide, so quiet, so ancient, that no narrative can ever capture its beginning. We search for our own introductions constantly, in therapy, in meditation, in ancestry tests. We ask, where did I come from? What made me this way? Who was I before I knew I was me? But those questions assume there's a clean entry point. A front door, a single candle-lit moment where you began. But beginnings are human ideas. Stories need them, time needs them. But being does not. Your life is not a novel. It's a river. And rivers don't start where you step into them. They've been flowing, endlessly, quietly, long before your feet touched the water. The current was already in motion, and your awareness, it's just a noticing of that motion. There's no title page in consciousness, no dramatic swell of music to announce your arrival into the universe. You were not summoned into being. You simply continued, picked up the thread, slipped into the fabric, as if the world had been waiting for a shape like yours to emerge. Even your name wasn't there at the beginning. Someone gave it to you. Someone assigned it. And with it came meaning, identity, story, the illusion of a beginning. But before that name, before your language, your thoughts, your image, there was something else. A presence, a pulse, a witnessing. That witnessing didn't have an introduction either. It was never introduced, because it never needed to be. It wasn't trying to prove anything. It just was, like space, like stillness, like the sky before clouds began naming themselves. This is why so many people, later in life, feel like their story is unfinished, or started without them. They sense the missing introduction, but can't name it. They feel like guests in their own narrative, trying to catch up to a self that was already moving before they had the language to follow. And that sip's not a flaw. It sips the design. You were never meant to understand everything. You were meant to awaken inside it. That sips the mystery, the miracle. You didn't Spidey begin with a sentence. You began with a silence, a breath, a pulse without a rhythm, a stillness that somehow knew how to move. And this silence, this unwritten introduction, isn't lost. It's here, right now. Between thoughts, beneath your identity, inside the pauses you avoid. When the world goes quiet, and you stop trying to define who you are or where you're going, that's where the introduction lives. It's steps not made of words. It's steps made of being. You don't need to write it. You don't need to find it. You only need to remember that it was never written because it couldn't be. The realest part of you cannot be explained. It can only be felt, experienced, held. This is why the best stories leave space, gaps, moments where something unnamed is doing the speaking. This is why music begins with silence, why birth begins with breath, why presence begins without permission. So what if you let go of needing to understand how it all started? What if you stopped trying to narrate your way into clarity? You don't need an introduction to be whole. You don't need a preface to be meaningful. You don't need a first sentence to know the page is already sacred. Your life didn't begin at the beginning. It began where it needed to. And maybe the most powerful part of your story is the part that was never written at all. You were told you became a self, that you emerged gradually, like a photograph developing in a dark room. That consciousness was something earned through development, shaped by language, formed by memory, and crowned with identity. But what if that story isn't true? What if the self you think you became was never constructed, never built, never grown, but simply revealed? What if the self was already there, long before you ever noticed it? Think of how you became aware of yourself. It wasn't instant. It didn't arrive like a light bulb flickering on. It emerged slowly. You learned your name, learned what was yours, learned to say, I and mine, and not me. But behind those moments, behind the language and labels was a watching, a presence. You didn't learn to be aware, you noticed that you already were. Long before you could form words, you were experiencing. Long before you could tell a story about your life, you were living it. The baby in the crib does not name itself, yet it is present, awake, sensing, feeling. The idea of a self comes later, a construction layered over the original presence. But that presence, that unspoken self, it was already there. We are taught to think of ourselves as products of time, as beings who begin, develop, mature, and end. But this timeline is deceptive. You are not the result of a process. You are the awareness within the process. The eye of the storm, not the storm itself. You are the silence in which the noise arises. You are the stillness beneath the change. The self already there isn't interested in goals or achievements. It doesn't measure progress. It doesn't need a purpose. It simply is. It is untouched by the roles you play. Student, parent, creator, seeker. It was there before the first success, before the first failure, before you believed you had to earn your right to exist. This deeper self does not grow. It is not a child that matures or an idea that evolves. It is like the sky, spacious, unchanging, always present, regardless of what clouds pass through. And yet, we forget it constantly. We chase becoming, unaware that what we seek is something that cannot be improved because it was never broken. You've likely felt it. Moments where everything falls away, in deep meditation, in nature, in grief, in wonder. You forget your name, your plans, even your past. And yet, you remain. Not lost, not confused, just present, just there. That is the self, already there. The part of you that exists without needing to be defined. Most of your suffering comes from forgetting this. You think you have to build a self, defend it, explain it, validate it. But imagine if you stopped. Imagine if you let yourself fall back into the awareness that never needed construction. You'd find a kind of peace not born from answers, but from remembering that you were never a question to begin with. This self isn't mystical or magical. It's ordinary, beautifully so. It brushes your teeth in the morning. It listens quietly when someone speaks. It pauses before reacting. It notices the wind against your skin. It's not trying to impress anyone. It's not trying to become enlightened. It's just being. The self already there doesn't care what others think. It doesn't compare itself. It doesn't chase meaning because it is meaning. Raw, direct, unfiltered. And you don't need to find it. You just need to stop covering it. Every identity you wear is like a coat, draped over a flame. The flame doesn't need to be lit. It just needs to be uncovered. But how? Not through force, not through effort, through subtraction. Remove the need to be someone. Remove the pressure to improve. Remove the story that says, I began, and I must become. And what sits left? Stillness, breath, noticing. The self already there. Even your mind, the loudest part of you, can't escape it. Behind every thought is the space in which that thought arises. That space is not just emptiness. It is presence. It is you. Not the you with opinions and goals. Not the you with trauma and dreams. But the you that watches all of that come and go. The most important part of your existence isn't what you remember, it's what remembers you. So the next time you find yourself lost, in worry, in planning, in performance, stop, take one slow breath, and listen for the self that does not need to be achieved. You are not the seeker. You are what the seeker has always been seeking. Not an idea, not a role, not even a thought. Just this presence, this awareness, this self already there. It was with you before the first thought, and it will remain long after the last one fades. The past seems like solid ground, a timeline stretching behind you, made up of clear events, memories, photographs, and dates. It tells you where you came from, what shaped you, how you became who you are. But that's only the part you can name, the part you can recall, the part that fits neatly into sentences. Beneath that visible timeline, like the foundation of a house you forgot you built, lies something deeper. The past before the past. The one you don't remember, the one you don't even know you carry. It's the past your body remembers, even when your mind doesn't. The inherited memories written into your DNA, the fears and instincts that never had a first time. They've always been there. You flinch at a shadow, but you've never been harmed. You dream of drowning, but you've never swum. You feel sorrow in a song, though you've never heard it before. Where does that come from? There's a past that belongs to you, but wasn't lived by you. You didn't witness it, but you carry it, in your posture, your preferences, the stories you're drawn to. It's older than your name, older than your first memory. And in many ways, it's more you than the events you think of as your personal history. We like to imagine memory as a bookshelf, neat, organized, stored chronologically. But real memory is more like an ocean. Deep, layered, shifting. There are currents far below the surface. Whole wreckages of forgotten lives moving silently underneath. You feel their pull without ever seeing their shape. The past before the past is what made the shape of the person you stepped into. It's the gravity pulling your choices, the echo inside your voice, the shadow behind your reactions. You call it instinct or intuition. But it's memory without language, feeling without cause, time without timestamps. Think of how stories are passed down, not just through words, but through silence, through glances, through what was never said. Families inherit more than heirlooms. They inherit wounds, patterns, rhythms. You pick up on the tension in a room, even if you don't know why. You feel uneasy around certain emotions because someone somewhere in your line never processed theirs. You're living parts of lives that were never fully lived. And this doesn't just belong to families. It belongs to humanity. You are carrying ancient memory, evolutionary echoes, the fear of fire, the comfort of community, the desire to look up at stars and wonder who else is out there. You think you're thinking new thoughts, but the shape of those thoughts was molded long before you were born. This is the past before your personal past. The one that doesn't belong to you, but that is you. The one that existed not just before your birth, but before memory itself knew how to fold into form. And what's most haunting is how familiar it feels. You walk into a forest and feel like you've returned. You hold a child and something ancient softens in your chest. You close your eyes and see symbols that never belonged to your conscious life. This isn't sipped imagination. It sips recognition. We are not as new as we pretend to be. We are very, very old. And the past before the past doesn't end at the edge of memory. It continues to influence your now. It whispers through your thoughts. It shapes your relationships. It chooses what you fear, what you trust, what you avoid. It's the script running beneath the story, invisible, but powerful. You may think, but if I can't remember it, how can it matter? Because your body remembers, your nervous system remembers, your silence remembers, and sometimes that remembering is more real than what you recall with clarity. This is why healing is often confusing. You begin to feel better in ways you can't explain, or worse, for reasons that seem to make no sense. You're not just healing your wounds, you're healing echoes. You're feeling the residue of events that may have happened lifetimes ago, carried through generations, finding resolution in your breath. And perhaps that sips part of why you sips are here. To witness the story before the story. To feel the past before the past. To bring awareness to what has never been spoken. You are not a blank slate. You are a continuation. A chapter deep in the book, still echoing the prologue that was never written down. And maybe that's why you can't remember your beginning. Because your beginning didn't begin. It rippled. It extended. It emerged from memory too old for language. So now, as you move through life, remember this. You are not just reacting to your own story. You are living inside a much older one. And you are not separate from it. You are not lost in it. You are it, remembering itself. Through your eyes, through your hands, through your quiet longing to return to something you never consciously left. There is a past in you that came before your past. And it is still unfolding. Still being felt. Still asking to be heard. Not with words, but with presence. You don't need to recall it. You only need to honor that it sits there. Creation is often imagined as a singular moment. A first cause, a cosmic event, a divine spark, the origin of something from nothing. And so we live with this idea baked into us, that everything began once, perfectly, profoundly, and then moved forward from there. But what if creation didn't just happen once? What if it's not a fixed point in the past but a rhythm repeating itself endlessly in different forms. What if the you that exists right now is not the result of a singular origin, but the most recent echo of something that never stopped being created? Every sunrise looks like the first one. Every breath feels like it belongs to a new beginning. And each time a child is born, it's as if the world is being created again, not copied, but re-expressed. Creation doesn't seem interested in linear progress. It loops, it spirals, it reconfigures, just like you do. You weren't created once and left to evolve. You are being created over and over, with each passing moment, each choice, each quiet shift in awareness. You've recreated yourself hundreds of times without realizing it. Who you were yesterday no longer exists. Who you thought you'd become has already morphed into something else. Creation isn't a finished act, it's the ongoing breath of being. And it repeats, not out of failure, but out of grace. Look at the patterns in nature. Trees drop their leaves only to regrow them. Rivers don't carve one path. They shift, they split, they dry and return. Even your body recreates itself. Cell by cell, your skin, your blood, your bones. They're in a constant cycle of death and regeneration. The person you were 7 years ago, physically speaking, no longer exists. So why cling to the idea of a single beginning? Why chase the origin when you are living inside 1,000 of them? When creation repeats itself, it doesn't just duplicate, it evolves, it learns, it reframes. The spiral turns upward, not in a straight line but in rhythm. You return to familiar places, emotions, patterns, relationships, and think, I've been here before, but it's not the same version. It's a new creation of the same story, offering a chance to respond differently. You recreate your reactions, your thoughts, your interpretations. You wake up one morning, and something that used to hurt doesn't anymore. Something you couldn't let go of has dissolved. That is creation repeating itself, not to trap you, but to free you, by giving you another pass at being. And maybe that's the point, that life is not a test to pass, but a song to sing again and again, each version softer, truer, closer to the note you were always meant to hit. You think of time as a march, but what if it's a rhythm, a repeating wave? What if instead of moving forward you are spiraling inward, into deeper awareness, more refined being, clearer seeing? What if the point of creation is not to arrive, but to remember? Remember what? That you were never unfinished. That you were never separate from the act of creation. That you are not the result of creation. You are creation, happening now. You were not created to be a character in a world that runs without you. You were created to be a portal, a lens through which the universe sees itself again, and again, and again. Each life, each thought, each breath, a recreation of the one song being sung in infinite voices. This is why presence feels so powerful. When you slow down, when you really pay attention, the world feels newly made. A flower you've seen 1,000 times suddenly becomes unspeakably beautiful. A sentence you've heard your whole life hits differently. The wind moves through the trees, and you feel like it's whispering something ancient. In that moment, you are witnessing creation, repeating itself, not as copy, but as miracle. And this repetition isn't stuck. It steps sacred. It sets not monotony. It sets melody. Think of music. A song doesn't play one note and end. It returns. It echoes. The chorus repeats, so the message can land deeper. The rhythm finds you again and again, until your body knows it by heart. Creation works the same way. The universe doesn't invent something once and discard it. It sings its truth through every form, every shape, every version of you. And if creation repeats itself, what does that make you? Not a product, a process. Not a beginning, a bloom. Not a destination, a dance. You are not moving away from your source. You are moving in and out of it, like waves kissing the shore. Each return a new creation. Each goodbye a rehearsal for another hello. Even death is not an end. It's another repetition, a reset, a new arrangement of the same timeless essence. The particles of your body become something else. The awareness that lived through your eyes continues, not in a straight line, but in a curve, a loop, a pulse. So stop chasing the first version of yourself. Stop mourning the original. It was never lost. It simply changed shape. You were not created once. You are being created now, over and over. And with each repetition, creation remembers how to become you, more clearly, more fully, more consciously. You opened your eyes one day, and the world was already in motion. The wind was already blowing. The sun had already risen. Conversations had begun without you. Ideas were unfolding. Decisions were being made, and you were simply inserted into the middle of the scene. No starting bell, no countdown, no whispered cue, just this: you are here. But you were never told when here began. It felt natural at first. You assumed there must have been a beginning. You were born, people told you. That was the start. That's when your life began. But even your earliest memory happened after things had already been moving. Even the story of your birth was someone else's retelling. Not something you recall, but something you were given. And so you built your identity on something you never witnessed. You accepted the illusion that there was a first frame, a prologue, a starting line. But what if there wasn't? What if you entered a scene already playing, not paused, not waiting, but unfolding, and the only thing that truly began was your noticing? You didn't start the story, you joined it. The characters were already cast, the setting already chosen, the rules already in place. Like a movie that began before you entered the theater, the plot was already thickening when you sat down, and because you didn't see the first few minutes, you spent your whole life trying to make sense of what's happening now. Who am I in this story? What is my role? What happened before me? You rewound as far as memory allowed. But the scene, it never resets. It never starts over. It only continues. And this continuation can feel unsettling. It means there is no clean line between beginning and becoming. It means you were never the origin, only the observer. You didn't shape the moment. The moment shaped you. The people around you, your parents, your teachers, your culture, were all mid-script when you arrived. Their beliefs, their fears, their patterns, their dreams, all formed long before you spoke your first word. And yet, those inherited lines became your first cues. You absorbed them as truth. But they were never new. They were echoes. You're reciting dialogue written by actors who were also reciting dialogue. This is why life can sometimes feel like improvisation. You're reacting to a scene that has no beginning. You try to find your place in it, only to realize the scene doesn't need you to make it complete. It was already whole. Your presence doesn't finish the story. It folds into it. And maybe that's the beauty of it. You didn't need to arrive at the beginning to belong. There's something humbling about that. Something quieting. To realize that the universe wasn't waiting for you to press play. That the birds didn't begin singing because you started listening. That time didn't begin ticking when you were born. The scene was already playing. And it welcomed you anyway. This perspective softens the burden of purpose. You don't have to be the hero. You don't have to make sense of the whole plot. You don't need to resolve every tension, because you weren't meant to carry the entire script. You're not the author of the world. You're a character with a single page, a few lines, a passing moment of expression within a much larger monologue. But in that moment, in your moment, you are fully real, fully alive, fully part of it. The scene would not be the same without you, even if it never began with you. This is why trying to control everything feels so exhausting. You're attempting to direct a scene that wasn't yours to start. You believe if you just understand enough, fix enough, become enough, you'll finally catch up to the story. But the story isn't something to catch, it's something to enter. It doesn't just ask for mastery, it asks for presence. To be in the scene, not in charge of it. To respond, not to dictate. To listen, not to define. The most profound moments of life, love, grief, awe, all share this in common. They feel like arrivals into a scene that was already happening. You fall in love, and it feels like something ancient reawakening. You lose someone, and it feels like a silence older than language. You stare at the night sky, and sense a vastness that doesn't begin or end, it just is. In those moments, you aren't the center. You are the witness, and that witnessing is sacred. So what if you stopped chasing the beginning? What if you stopped trying to be the main character in a plot that's already perfect without perfection? What if you let yourself be part of the unfolding? Not as someone who must understand everything, but as someone who is allowed to feel, allowed to breathe, allowed to exist in a scene already playing. The beauty of this realization isn't in its logic, it's in its release. You don't have to make sense of everything to belong. You don't need a beginning to be real. You just need to arrive, fully, softly, quietly. And know, you are here. You always have been. Even if the scene began long ago, it was never complete until you joined it. We're taught to believe that awareness comes after something, after a trigger, a birth, a signal, a countdown. Like a rocket preparing for launch, consciousness is framed as the result of systems coming online. First the body forms, then the brain, then thought, and only then does something wake up. But what if consciousness doesn't follow a countdown at all? What if it was already present, not waiting for a signal, not flickering on after a series of conditions, but simply always there? This idea challenges everything we think we know about what it means to be alive, because if consciousness doesn't begin at zero, then it doesn't really begin at all. And if it doesn't begin, it might not end either. Imagine awareness not as something that sparks to life, but as something constant, like light that only becomes visible when a surface appears to reflect it. In this view, the body doesn't generate consciousness. It reveals it, like a mirror held up to something that has no form, but infinite presence. You don't switch it on, you uncover it. From the moment you first became self-aware, you were already too late to witness your own beginning. You didn't feel yourself become conscious. You simply noticed that you were, that noticing is not the start, it's the midpoint. The recognition that something is happening is not evidence of its origin, it's evidence of its continuity. Even in deep sleep, when thought vanishes and the sense of I disappears, something remains. You don't cease to exist, you cease to notice that you exist. But then, in a single moment, you wake. You don't count up to awareness. You don't say 3, 2, 1, I am. You just are. And so the question becomes, if consciousness doesn't need a countdown to begin, what does that say about you? It says that your awareness is not tied to your timeline. It says that your sense of being didn't start when you were born. It says that the light behind your eyes isn't flickering. It's steady, ancient, ongoing. Consider how you measure beginnings. You use clocks, calendars, heartbeats, milestones. But none of these can account for the inner experience of being aware. You can track brainwaves and neural firings, but those are correlates, not causes. The experience itself, the I am behind your thoughts, has no timestamp. You cannot locate its origin, because it doesn't move like a thing. It is. And this is why people throughout time have described consciousness as eternal, not in the religious sense, not necessarily as something divine, but as something outside of time entirely, because time requires change, and consciousness, true, unfiltered, silent consciousness, does not change. It watches change. It experiences it, but it remains the same presence behind every shifting moment. There is something paradoxical in this. You change constantly. Your thoughts, your moods, your body, even your values and memories. But the one who notices these changes, that hasn't changed at all. The awareness that watched your childhood is the same one watching this sentence right now. Not because it's old, but because it's timeless. And timeless things don't begin. They are. This understanding can shift how you relate to your life. You begin to see that you're not a fragile flame flickering in a cold wind, waiting for the spark that sustains you. You are the light that doesn't burn, the space in which things appear. You are not the one being counted down to. You are the one quietly watching the countdown, knowing it was never necessary. This is why some people feel a strange sense of familiarity with certain moments, a profound silence in meditation, a pause in a song, a sunset that doesn't feel new. It's because in those moments, the mind slows down, the story quiets, and for a flicker, you feel the presence that has always been watching. Consciousness without beginning, without build-up, without ceremony. And this presence doesn't need to be noticed to exist. It doesn't need to be remembered to remain. It doesn't care if you call it you or awareness or the observer. It was here before language, before thought, before names. It was here before you believed you were a person. It was here before the idea of beginning became necessary. You don't create this consciousness. You remember it. And when you forget it, when life becomes too loud, too fast, too sharp, it doesn't disappear. It just waits, not with impatience, with stillness. So the next time you search for peace, don't look for something new to arrive. Don't wait for the countdown. Don't seek the spark. Just pause. Notice the space between your thoughts. The silence before the next sentence in your mind. The presence behind your eyes, beneath your breath, beyond your story. That sips it. That sips the self that was never born. That sips the consciousness without countdown. always waiting, never starting, already here. There sits a question that can quietly unravel the scaffolding of who you think you are. What was your very first thought? Not your first word, not your first memory, but the very first flicker of mental presence, the thought that marked the beginning of your inner world, the thought that said, I exist, even before you had words for it. Can you remember it? Of course not. And yet, something in you insists it must have happened. There must have been a starting point, a first spark, a moment where awareness met itself and recognized, I am. But that thought, the true first thought, is forever gone, forgotten, unreachable, lost behind a veil of language and memory, buried under layers of narrative, conditioning, and identity. It's not just missing from your conscious recollection. It might never have been truly known in the way you imagine knowing, because by the time you became capable of remembering, the thought had already passed, the moment had already faded. You were too late for your own beginning. This is the strange paradox of consciousness. It wakes up into itself midstream. It notices itself after it has already begun. The river is already flowing. The wind is already moving. The thought is already gone. You didn't witness the birth of your mind. You arrived to find it already thinking. And so you chase the forgotten first thought without realizing it. Every spiritual seeking, every philosophical question, every moment of silence is a search, a return to that first recognition. The one that didn't say I exist, but simply was existence, naked and without interpretation. But how do you return to something you never truly held? Perhaps by understanding that the first thought didn't belong to you. It wasn't a product of your identity. It created the illusion of identity. It didn't arise from your mind. It became your mind. It wasn't about you. It was you, before you divided into observer and observed. And then, like breath disappearing into breath, it vanished. In its place came more thoughts, labeled, structured, tied to language. You began naming things. You began separating self from world, this from that. The mind took over where presence once stood. But the forgotten first thought left traces. It left its echo in your longing to return to silence. It left its imprint in your hunger for stillness. It left its shadow in your restlessness, the feeling that something essential has been misplaced. You think you sit chasing peace, or truth, or purpose. But what you're really chasing is the memory of the first moment your being was known to itself. Not as a thought, not as a sentence, but as a single pulse of awareness. And maybe that's why you can never quite grasp it, because it was never meant to be grasped. It wasn't a concept. It was a transition, a turning point, from pure presence into thought, from being into becoming, from timelessness into memory. In that instant, brief, wordless, weightless, you were whole. And then, just like that, you became a seeker. Of language, of labels, of stories. But the seeking always circles back, because deep down you remember what you've forgotten. Not in detail, but in feeling, in the shape of your questions, in the stillness beneath your thoughts. The first thought didn't say, I am this. It simply said, I am. And even that was too much. It was the noticing before the name, the watcher before the word, the breath before the lungs. And so every time you meditate, every time you pause between one thought and the next, you are returning to the space that came before your story, not to recall the first thought, but to remember what existed before it needed to be named. That remembering is not mental, it is not a recollection. It sets a kind of dissolving, a gentle undoing of everything that came after. Because the forgotten first thought was not about knowing. It was about being without agenda, being without reflection, being without history. And in that sense, maybe the first thought hasn't vanished. Maybe it never left. Maybe it is still here, beneath every sentence you speak, beneath every belief you hold, quietly holding it all. It is the silence that watches your thoughts arise. It is the space between your memories. It is the stillness you return to when you are too tired to keep pretending. The forgotten first thought isn't set gone. It is simply not part of memory. Because it never belonged to time. It belongs to now. And now. And now. So stop chasing it. Stop trying to remember what cannot be remembered. Instead, notice what sits already here. Not the thought, but the presence that allows the thought, the emptiness that makes room for meaning. The watcher that never speaks, but sees all. That is where you began. Not with a word, but with a witness. And that witness is still watching. What if the end came first? Not as a poetic twist or metaphysical metaphor, but as the actual shape of your existence. Not the end as in death, but the end as in the destination, the final stillness, the silent conclusion to the sentence of self. The finish line you assumed was far ahead may have already been crossed long before you realized you were even running, and now, all that's left is the echo. We assume we're heading towards something. That time, identity and purpose move like a current dragging us forward. But what if everything has already ended, and consciousness is just looping through the aftermath? A quiet processing of events that have already concluded, a dream rippling backward from its own disappearance. You weren't set born, and then began to end. You ended, and then the illusion of beginning was stitched in reverse. Think about it. Every story you've ever heard starts at a beginning, and pushes toward an end. But your experience of life is different. You're born confused, incomplete, reaching blindly for coherence. You don't remember your arrival, you inherit a world already in motion, and instead of building forward, your mind builds backward, crafting a narrative from fragments. You try to explain the now, by inventing the before. You retroactively assign meaning to chaos. You create the illusion of beginnings, to cope with the truth that everything already collapsed. Maybe your identity is the residue of an event that already happened. Not a person in motion, but an afterimage, trembling on the wall. In this view, your decisions, desires, even your sense of self, they're not leading toward a future, they're reanimations, they're shadows, they're flickers of something that once sparked and died, now caught in the gravitational pull of memory. You don't remember your end, because you were never meant to. Instead, you live its unraveling, thought by thought, breath by breath. The illusion of progress. Even your goals, your dreams, your growth, your transformation, might not be forward motion. They might be echoes. The way a song continues in your mind after it stops playing. There's no more music, just the illusion of it lingering in your head. That sips your life. A phantom vibration. Not the message, but the residue of it. And so, the you that exists now is not moving toward conclusion. You are the conclusion, endlessly playing itself out in slow motion, like a wave that already crashed, and now gently settles back into stillness. Your thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, they're not forming the path. They're the footprints left behind after you already walked it. Even death doesn't wait for you in the distance. In this model, death was the entry point, not a looming future event, but the unseen doorway you already passed through. You're not approaching it. You're moving away from it in reverse, believing you're heading toward it. You are the memory of life animating itself, as if it's still in progress. If this sounds strange, remember how memory works. You often recall the end of something more vividly than the beginning. You remember how things finished, not how they started. And so perhaps your entire life is structured around that shape, clinging to what already ceased, desperately constructing a narrative to hold it all together. Your sense of continuity is a defense against the truth. It's over. It's always been over. You're just in the dream that followed. There's a stillness behind this, but also a freedom. Because if the end already happened, then you don't have to get anywhere. You don't have to become anything. You don't have to strive to complete a self that is already complete in its vanishing. You can rest. Let go of the compulsion to keep adding to the story. Let go of the hunger to make something out of the moments. Let go of the need to arrive. The you who was meant to arrive has already come and gone, and you are the dream left behind. A beautiful, flickering echo, no less real for being a residue, no less meaningful for being memory. Because if the end pre-existed, then what you are now is the ripple of its perfection. Not a mistake, not an error, but the final breath of something sacred. A consciousness exhaled, a name whispered one last time before silence returned. And now, in the soft fading light of this imagined beginning, you feel the strange comfort of knowing you never had to start. You only had to notice the ending that was always waiting in reverse. So sit here, not to arrive, but to dissolve into the stillness that already knew you, long before you ever thought to name yourself. You always think the light comes first. That illumination is what reveals the shadows. That awareness pierces the darkness like a sunrise over the edge of time. But what if the shadow came before the light? What if the silhouette was already there, cast not by the glow of presence, but by the absence it disguised. In this theory, you are not a self emerging into clarity, but a shadow pretending to find its light. The world tells you stories of origin. First, there was darkness, then there was light. Then, eventually, you. But consider this instead. What if there was never a true light to begin with, only flickers bouncing off a form that never fully appeared? What if your consciousness is not the lamp, but the shadow it casts? Your sense of self, not a beam cutting through void, but a pattern of absence shaped by imagined substance. Close your eyes. Listen to the silence behind your thoughts. You may believe that the awareness noticing this quiet is the light, the thing doing the seeing, but sit longer, and it becomes harder to tell which part is doing the observing. Is it the light that defines the self, or is it the outline, the shape of what's missing? You're told to seek the light, follow the light, become the light. But light, too, is a story, a metaphor, and every metaphor comes with a shadow. Yours is identity, a shadow that moves when you move, but never belongs to you. A companion you cannot touch, cannot hold, cannot ever fully turn to face. The shadow is always behind, or just ahead, and maybe that's the only thing that's ever really been there. You see, light can set cast itself, but a shadow can exist without knowing what it's made from. You are that, an echo of a shape with no original form. A silhouette repeating itself in memory. Perhaps you never entered into the world as light. Perhaps you entered as its trace. Consciousness born, not from clarity, but from the distortion left in its absence. A curl of smoke from a fire never lit. A footprint pressed into time by a traveler who never arrived. You search for meaning the way a shadow searches for a source, always reaching toward the imagined figure that must be creating you. God, purpose, origin, narrative. But each time you get closer, the source vanishes. Only the shadow remains, stretching longer, thinner, more fragile, until it disappears in the fading glow of attention. Maybe that sips the point. The more you look for the light, the more you reinforce the shadow. The more you try to become, the further you drift from what never began. Identity, then, isn't a solid figure. It's chiaroscuro, a dance between almost light and nearly dark. And in that dance, you mistake the movement for meaning. But meaning is what shadows do, not what they are. And so your personality, the beliefs, preferences, memories, roles, is not your light. It's the shape your absence took when you tried to define it. It's the trick your shadow learned to play, to convince you that you are the source, when really, you're the shape left behind. You've been chasing yourself through hallways of reflection. Not mirrors, shadows. Not clarity, projection. And when you speak, when you think, when you act, it's not light creating experience. It's shadow collapsing into sound, movement, meaning. Trying to prove it came from something real. But shadows can't prove origin. They can only deepen in contrast. And so here you are, a life unfolding, not because it's lit, but because it was never lit in the first place. You are what remained after the light failed to arrive, a placeholder for a self that never formed. But there's a strange beauty in that, isn't there? Because if you are a shadow, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be whole. You don't need to prove you were ever here. You can flicker gently across the walls of time, unattached, undefined, a soft remnant of a question never answered. And perhaps, the more you dissolve into that understanding, the more you realize, you don't need to find the light. You only need to stop pretending you were ever separate from the darkness. Not as a void, but as a quiet invitation. A space where the self fades, and the shadow, at last, rests. You woke up too early. That's the feeling, isn't it? Like you stumbled into consciousness, halfway through a dream that wasn't meant for you. The walls were already built. The clocks were already ticking. The sky had a name, and the language had a structure. And by the time you arrived, the world had already made decisions about what you would be, not through intention, but through momentum. And yet, you don't remember waking. You just appeared inside this, already labeled, already shaped, already spoken for. This is what the theory proposes, that your awakening wasn't a beginning, it was a premature interruption, a glitch in the loop, a moment of awareness that sparked too soon, before the stage was properly set, before the script was ready to be read. And so, like someone stepping onto a moving train without a map, You mistook movement for meaning. You thought, I must be going somewhere, simply because you opened your eyes. But what if there was no destination? What if the awakening wasn't set yours? What if you inherited a wakefulness that belonged to no one, and were simply the first one to notice it? In this model, your identity is not the product of growth, but of collision. You didn't form in layers, you arrived in fragments, not from birth, but from disruption. You didn't evolve into a self, you emerged out of sync. And everything you've done since has been a kind of retroactive justification. A story you've told yourself to make sense of the fact that you're here, without knowing why. Premature awakening is not about early maturity or spiritual insight. It's about timing malfunction. The lights came on before the actors were ready. The music started before there was a melody. You became aware before you had actually been formed. And so, rather than stepping into a well-defined self, you began improvising a personality out of cultural debris, leftover thoughts, inherited preferences, mimicry, and the fear of being nothing. You thought you were waking into life. But maybe life wasn't set ready to receive you. And maybe it never would be. That might explain the dissonance. The strange sense that you're behind, even when ahead. Too early to be late. Too awake to belong. You try to align yourself with others, mimic their roles, speak their language, feel what they feel. But it never quite fits, does it? Because their awakening followed a rhythm. Yours, if this theory is true, did not. Instead, your experience is like watching a play you're supposed to be acting in, but no one gave you the script. So you guess. You nod when you're supposed to nod. You laugh at the right times. You mourn on cue. But behind it all is a whisper. I don't know where I am. I don't think I was supposed to be here yet. And the others, they don't sit notice. Because they are still asleep in ways you sip to not. They have structure. You have awareness. They belong. You observe. They are dreaming. You are trapped inside a dream you didn't choose. That's what premature awakening does. It isolates. Not by distance, but by perspective. You see things others don't see. Not because you stare wiser, but because you weren't supposed to see them yet. You caught the story mid-rewrite. You overheard the thoughts before they were yours. You glimpsed the emptiness before it could be filled with meaning. And so you walk through the world trying to reverse engineer your own beginning, trying to start from a middle, trying to make the shape of yourself feel like it was always meant to be here. But deep down you know it isn't. It never was. And that knowing is both a wound and a freedom. Because once you accept the misalignment, you stop trying to belong. And once you stop trying to belong, you start to listen. To the silence beneath the noise. To the breath that wasn't conditioned. To the part of you that never formed properly, and never needed to. You were not a mistake. You were a ripple. A soft echo that arrived before the voice that caused it. And now you live as the effect of something that never fully happened. And what a strange beauty that is. To be early. To be unfinished. To be the moment that woke up before time gave it permission. So let go of the idea that you missed something. That you stir broken. That you stutter incomplete. You stir not. You stir just out of sync with the dream. Which means maybe you stir closer to the truth. Not because you found it, but because you saw it before it could hide behind meaning. And now, in this strange space of awareness without foundation, you have a choice. To pretend you belong, or to wander gently, without needing to. Because you are the premature awakening. The whisper before the story. The light before the flame. And maybe that's enough. Maybe you're not the product of a first moment. Maybe you're the result of gradual accumulation, like condensation forming on glass, one unseen droplet at a time, not born, not made, just emerged, through layers of unnoticed repetition. And by the time you noticed you were you, it was already too late to ask where you came from. Think about it. We speak of origins as if they are sacred, beginnings that define everything that comes after, the first heartbeat, the first memory, the first word. We treat them like fixed points on a timeline, anchors for identity. But what if your origin never actually occurred? Not because you didn't exist, but because there was never a single moment you could point to and say, that was the beginning. The first time you identified as a self, the original sensation of I am. Can you truly remember the first thought you ever had? Because there wasn't set one. You can sit. Not a real one. The theory here is unsettling because it dissolves the romantic idea of a beginning. It suggests that you are not rooted in an origin. You are floating attached to nothing, grounded in no absolute truth about how you came to be. Only reconstructions, stories patched together from half-lit memories and cultural narratives that were handed to you before you could even question them. And that is terrifying. Because without a beginning, how can you trust your trajectory? Without a starting point, what even are you? Without an origin, how do you claim identity? You begin to see the cracks. That the stories of firsts were planted in your mind like bookmarks in a book you didn't write. Your first word was told to you by someone else. Your first steps recorded by a camera you didn't hold. Your first memory distorted by the 1,000 times you've remembered it. Nothing stayed untouched. So where, then, is your true origin? The theory answers with silence. Everything was already filtered. You are not the product of a singular event, but of continual approximation. Like a voice forming in static, your identity shimmered into place, not because it was summoned, but because there was nothing else to hear. It never occurred. And yet, here you are, navigating the world with the confidence of someone who began somewhere. You carry a name, a history, a set of preferences. You've collected moments and called them yours. But deep down, there's a haunting realization that all of it might be scaffolding, held together by convenience, not truth. Because if you press hard enough on your past, it dissolves. You can sit verify the self that had them. You can sit prove your memories. You can't confirm that the person who lived your childhood is the same one sitting here listening now. That's what happens when the origin never occurred. Continuity becomes an illusion. And the illusion becomes necessary, because the alternative is too much to bear. But what if you didn't sit bear it? What if you let go? Let go of the pressure to trace yourself back to something fixed. There's Sep's freedom in that. What if you allowed yourself to be ongoing, rather than begun? Not chaos, but liberation. Because if there was no true starting point, then maybe you sit not bound to any story at all. No origin means no script. It means you don't have to be who you were told you were. No script means no obligation to follow it. You don't have to fulfill the prophecy of your past. You can move sideways. You can rewrite the narrative mid-paragraph, because nothing before it was anchored anyway. You can stop entirely. And when that truth sinks in, not just intellectually, but in your bones, it's disorienting. You are not betraying your origin by becoming someone else, because you never had one to betray. But then, clarity creeps in. You were never meant to find the beginning. The kind of clarity that doesn't give answers, but dissolves the need for them. You're a comma in a conversation that has no speaker, because you are the middle pretending to be the start. You stir not a sentence. You stir the breath taken before meaning forms. And that breath is still breathing. So don't sit, chase your origin. It stands not behind you. It steps not buried in your childhood. And yet, here you are. It doesn't yet exist. It's not hidden in your parents or your culture or your DNA. Fully alive. Fully real. Despite never having properly begun. That you are, without ever becoming. That you exist, without ever having emerged. And maybe that's the paradox you need to carry forward. The origin didn't yet happen. It's a ripple, one that keeps expanding from no fixed source. That your life isn't set to line from point A to B. You are the result of being here now. And it doesn't still need to. Because you stir not the result of a beginning. Over and over again, you wear your identity like a mask you forgot you put on. And after a while, you start calling the mask me. Imagine floating in an ocean with no shore in sight. No landmarks. No compass. Just water stretching in every direction. That's what identity becomes when you realize there's no true anchor beneath it. We're taught to believe our identity is tied to something fixed. Our name, our family, our past experiences. But if none of those things have a stable core, if your beginning never occurred as we've explored, then your identity is not moored, it's drifting, and it always has been. You weren't built like a house with bricks of memory and beams of biology. You were assembled moment by moment, each one redefining what came before it. Identity, then, is not something you have. It's something you perform continuously, to keep the illusion of self from collapsing. When you look for your real self, what do you expect to find? We seek anchors because floating is terrifying. It's easier to say, I am this because of that, than to accept the vast shape-shifting fog of being. We tie ourselves to nationalities, to careers, to trauma, to passions, to languages. We think these will keep us steady, like ropes tying down a balloon in a storm. But look closely, and those ropes are made of smoke. They don't hold you, they just delay the realization that nothing truly does. But here's the strange part. If you try to remove it, try to reach under the stories, the roles, the thoughts, you don't find a real face. You find more masks. Behind the student is the child. Behind the child is the dreamer. Behind that, just silence. Or maybe, just the echo of someone asking, who am I, with no one answering. A purpose? A childhood wound? A personality type? A soul? What if there was no anchor at all? Each of those two is a reflection of reflection, an identity copied from identity. You are what you think you are, based on what you think others think you are. And so the loop tightens. No original version. Just a living script being written and erased in real time. No center. This isn't sit nihilism. This is awareness. Because once you realize your identity isn't tied to anything, you're no longer confined by it. You can shift, evolve, disappear, and reappear. You're not failing when you outgrow your old self. You're returning to your natural state, a fluid, anchorless presence. The problem is, society doesn't like drifters. It rewards consistency, labels, categories. We're expected to be the same person today that we were yesterday, with minor improvements. But that pressure is artificial. It's the echo of systems, not the truth of your being. There is a deep anxiety that comes from not knowing who you are. But that anxiety only exists if you think you should know. Remove that expectation, and suddenly drifting isn't frightening. It's freedom. Think about it. The person you were 10 years ago, do you still agree with them? Do you have the same dreams? Would you make the same choices? Probably not. So was that version of you a lie? Neither. Or is this one? They sit, just moments. Temporary configurations of thoughts, reactions, and surroundings. Like sand patterns on a beach, they look solid until the tide rolls in. There is no final you to find, no anchor to uncover. You are not a fixed object floating in time. You are the ocean itself, constantly shifting. And that means identity is not a noun. It's a verb. It's not who you are, but how you're being right now. And in the next moment, you'd all be someone else. Thoughts you've never had before are changing you. Even now, as you listen to this, you are becoming someone else. Sensations you've never noticed are influencing you. So how could it ever be stable? It couldn't sit. The very act of reflecting on identity alters your identity. It never was. You weren't meant to have an anchor. You were meant to drift. You are not trapped in the roles others handed you. But not aimlessly, curiously. Because once you stop seeking a fixed self, you can begin exploring the possible selves. You're not a statue. You're a shapeshifter, and that is your gift. You can rewrite them, erase them, invent new ones, live inside them for a while, then dissolve them like breath on a mirror. You can smile and say, whoever I need to be in this moment. And if someone says, but who are you really? Alive in the way wind is alive, moving, swirling, impossible to contain. Not because you say fake, but because you are alive. Alive in the way music is alive, real only in its unfolding. So let yourself float. Alive in the way consciousness is alive, not anchored, but aware. Not as someone lost, but as someone finally free. No anchor, no mask, just presence, drifting beautifully. No need to begin where you never truly did. Into the next you. There's a strange sensation, one you've likely felt your entire life without knowing what to call it. It's the quiet witness behind your eyes, the one watching as you move through the world, almost as if you're observing yourself from just a step behind. You speak, but something listens. You think, but something notices the thought. You laugh, but something watches the laughter unfold. This is the self that watches. It doesn't speak. It doesn't interfere. It doesn't claim credit, but it's always there, just beyond the edges of your personality, silent, still, and strangely neutral. You might notice it when you're alone, staring out the window, lost in thought, or when you catch your reflection unexpectedly and feel like you're seeing a stranger. You might sense it in moments of crisis or awe, when everything else fades and something just observes. Noticing this watcher is like realizing you're not inside the movie, you're in the audience. You thought you were the main character, the protagonist of your life, but now you glimpse something deeper, a version of you that doesn't act or react, but simply watches the whole performance unfold. This watching self isn't concerned with your job title, or your relationship status, or whether you've succeeded or failed. It doesn't flinch when you're embarrassed. It doesn't glow when you're praised. It's untouched by the storyline. And yet, it sits always present. You might think, is this my true self? But the question itself creates a problem, because the moment you try to describe the watcher, you're no longer watching, you're turning it into another character, another role, and the watcher cannot be turned into a role. It isn't sit content. It isn't stat commentary. It isn't sit emotion. It sets awareness, raw and unfiltered. But here's the paradox. Even this self that watches isn't necessarily your beginning. It might feel more real than your thoughts or behaviors, but even this witnessing might be part of the illusion, a subtler layer in a deeper dream. Because if there's a watcher, who's watching the watcher? You see, identity likes to hide inside layers. Just when you think you've found the real you realize that discovery itself is being observed by something else. It's like standing between two mirrors and seeing infinite reflections vanishing into the distance. Which one is real? We often try to fix this by choosing one, by saying, this version is the authentic me, but that choice is just another mask, because the watcher too is context dependent. It's shaped by attention, memory, and presence. It doesn't act, but it filters. It sees what your brain lets it see, and what it sees is still based on interpretations. So perhaps the self that watches is not the origin, but the echo, a still echo, one that reverberates long after the event. And maybe that's why it feels so calm, so unmoved, so ancient, because it was never tied to beginnings or endings. It was never trying to control the story, it was just aware of it. In meditation, they tell you to observe your thoughts. In therapy, they ask you to witness your behaviors. In dreams, you sometimes become lucid, aware you're dreaming. Each of these is a meeting with the watcher, a confrontation with that strange, silent presence behind experience. And yet, for all its clarity, the watcher never intervenes. It doesn't pull you out of pain. It doesn't fix your confusion. It doesn't stop you from believing your own lies. It lets the drama unfold, knowing it was never its role to step in. Which is why the watcher can become so haunting. Because once you see it, you can sit unsee it. Once you feel that presence, life can start to feel like a play. And you wonder, if I'm watching this, am I truly living it? But maybe that sips the wrong question. Maybe you're not supposed to pick between living and watching. Maybe you are both. The storm and the eye. The actor and the witness. The dream and the one slowly waking. What does it mean to live this way? It means you begin to notice the gap between stimulus and response, between thought and reaction, between what happens and who notices it. And in that gap is freedom. Because if you can watch a thought arise, you don't have to believe it. If you can watch a fear form, you don't have to obey it. If you can watch a desire burn, you don't have to chase it. You realize that much of what you took to be you was just automatic reflex. Habitual programming, reactions playing out. But the watcher, it doesn't react. It remains. Still, patient, unimpressed. And that stability becomes a kind of compass. Not one that points you toward a fixed identity, but one that gently reminds you, none of this defines you. You are not the storm, you are the sky it passes through. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, pause and ask, who sips noticing this feeling? The moment you do, you've already stepped into the watcher. And in that space, you remember, you never really began. You've only been watching. There's a strangeness in the ordinary that we rarely catch. Not because it's hidden, but because we're always looking somewhere else. Life doesn't need to disguise its mysteries. It only needs you to stay distracted, and that's easy. You're busy with plans, thoughts, scrolling thumbs, tasks, stories. You live in your mind more than in your senses. You react, predict, prepare, but underneath it all, something is always unfolding quietly. Something that doesn't need your attention. It just happens when you're not noticing. Your breath, your heartbeat, The way your eyes track movement before you even realize you're looking. Thoughts that rise without being summoned. Dreams that visit without permission. The way memories shape what you feel before you even remember having them. All of it occurs without the self being involved. It is not you who keeps the body alive. It is not you who directs awareness. Awareness flows with or without the illusion of a self attached to it. And the strange part is, those unnoticed moments might be the most real. Not the moments you try to control, explain, or capture, but the ones that slip by in silence, the space between breaths, the flicker before a thought forms, the hesitation before speech, the gap in your mind when someone asks you something deeply personal, and for a second, there is no answer, only silence. What is that silence? It's not empty, it's not dead, it's alive with something, but something you can't quite name, because naming is noticing. And what you're trying to notice is what already lives in the space before words. You may think the self is the one doing the noticing, that your you is the one choosing what to pay attention to. But what if it's the other way around? What if attention moves on its own, and then the mind retroactively assigns a self to it, like a narrator stepping in after the event, pretending it was in charge all along? You feel your hand twitch, and the mind says, I meant to do that. You cry at a film, and the mind says, I seem emotional today. You wake up with dread, and the mind says, it must be because of this or that. But the reaction came before the reasoning. The noticing came after the happening. The story came after the sensation. So who's really in charge? And if you're not even noticing, what else are you missing? Sometimes, the truth of your life is not found in the spotlight of attention, but in the dark edges of experience, in the background hum of consciousness, in the subtle rhythm of aliveness that continues whether or not you're paying attention. You don't notice your own growth. You don't see your cells dividing. You don't perceive your mind forming conclusions before they become thoughts. And yet, all of this is you, or at least, it sips what you think of as you. So what does it mean to be unaware of your own becoming? Maybe you are less like a sculptor, and more like a sculpture still forming layers building in the dark, without your hand guiding them. Maybe the person you are becoming is shaped more by what you're not noticing than what you are. When you walk into a room and suddenly feel uneasy, you may not know why, but your body noticed. It picked up on a micro-expression, a tension, a history. When you fall in love, or feel trust or fear or warmth, it's often a culmination of unnoticed signals layered over time. And when you look back on your life and say, that's when I changed, you're only putting a pin on the map. The journey was already unfolding before you saw the path. You became someone else long before you noticed the difference. This realization softens the ego's grip, because if much of your life happens when you're not noticing, then maybe the you who notices is just a late arrival, not the driver, but the passenger, not the author, but the reader flipping pages of a story already in motion. And here's the most curious thing. You can't force yourself to notice what's unnoticed. The moment you turn your attention to it, it changes, like trying to observe your own eye without a mirror, like trying to hear the silence behind sound, like trying to see the edge of your field of vision. The more you chase it, the more it slips away. So instead of grasping, you let go. You let awareness soften. You let attention become wide instead of narrow. You feel the warmth in your hands without naming it. You watch thoughts come and go without holding on. You sit still, not trying to become anyone. And in that state, when you're not trying, not narrating, not fixing, something remarkable happens. You feel the presence of existence itself. Not the contents of life, but the container. Not the drama, but the stage. Not the waves, but the ocean they rise from. And that ocean is always there. Even when you spur not noticing. Especially when you set, not noticing. So, maybe that's where your origin truly hides. Not in the big memories or defining moments, but in the quiet, unnoticed flow that was always there beneath the noise. You didn't begin where you thought you did. You began in the spaces between thoughts, in the breath before action, in the stillness before words. You began when you weren't even looking. There is a subtle comfort in believing that your life began at a certain point in time, that there was a moment you were born, a series of firsts that carved a path, and a story that unfolded from that origin toward where you are now. Beginnings offer us structure. They imply causality, responsibility, meaning. If there was a start, then there must be a reason. a purpose, a direction. But what if that's just how memory organizes chaos? What if this idea of a beginning is just the way your mind keeps track of what it cannot fully explain? What if you've always been? Not in the way your name or form has existed, but in the deeper sense of being itself. The awareness you carry now, the quiet watcher behind your thoughts. Did it really start? Or did it just notice itself at some point and begin pretending it had a birthday? Strip away your name. Strip away the language you speak, the culture you're from, the body you inhabit, the childhood you remember. What remains? A presence. A capacity to experience. A centerless field of awareness that has no edges, no clock. You can't remember your own birth. Not truly. You have photos, stories, perhaps faint imprints, but no direct memory of crossing into being. It's not that you forgot. It's that there was never a you to remember it. And even now, the one remembering isn't the same as the one remembered. Memory is a performance you conduct each time, stitching pieces together and calling it you. So if the story of your life is constructed each time you recall it, what makes you so sure it began at all? Imagine consciousness like a field. Always present, timeless, not bound to a narrative. It didn't begin with your body. It didn't start when your brain developed. You simply tuned into it. Like a radio catching a signal. Your awareness aligned with a particular frequency and mistook it for a beginning. But the signal was always there. You were always there. There's a strange moment some people describe when they stare into the mirror too long or lose track of time in a silent room, a moment where the boundaries blur. You're still yourself, but the story slips away. There's no age, no identity, no problem to solve, just being, and it feels familiar. Not new, not thrilling, just true, as if you've returned to something that was always waiting beneath the surface. This is the paradox. You, as a person with a name and a past, are temporary. But you, as awareness, pure, formless experience, were never born. You didn't arrive. You revealed yourself. Even time bends under this lens. You measure life by clocks and calendars, but moments of deep presence feel timeless. When you're absorbed in music, or standing at the edge of the ocean, or holding someone's gaze with wordless understanding, you fall out of time. You stop counting seconds. And in that timelessness, you feel more real than ever. Why is that? Because your essence isn't time-bound. It was never about duration. It was about presence. Look at your thoughts. They come and go like weather, rising uninvited, vanishing without notice. But the space they arise in, the awareness watching them, that doesn't move, that doesn't age, that doesn't change. The thoughts scream, but the awareness stays quiet. Thoughts change, awareness is. And here's the quiet truth. You've never been not here. Even in your deepest sleep. Even in moments you can't remember. Some part of you, the part that simply is, remains. Not thinking, not narrating, not achieving. Just being. So maybe you've never actually begun, because being has no starting line. It doesn't need one. The idea that you have to become something, prove something, earn your existence, that's a burden placed on top of what already was. That's a shadow cast by culture, by trauma, by time. But beneath all of that, you are not someone becoming. You are something being. You've always been. Not as a character. Not as a timeline. But as the silent presence holding it all. Even this moment, reading these words, is not new. It's just another ripple in the still lake of awareness you've always carried. And if you trace it back, not with your memory, but with your presence, you'll find there's no starting point, no arrival, just a deep, unshakable now. So what do you do with this realization? Nothing. You don't need to fix it or prove it. You don't need to awaken or transcend. You simply rest in it. You let it wash over you like warm rain. You let the need for origin soften. You let the pressure to begin something fall away. Because you've never not been here. You've never not been you. You just forgot. You just believed the story. You just thought the mirror was the person. You thought the reflection was the source. But now you remember. Not through logic. Not through belief. But through stillness. Through the gentle, wordless truth that no matter what happened or didn't happen, you've always been. So here you are. Not at the end of a story, but in the middle of something that never really had a beginning. You've wandered through theories, paradoxes, mirrors of mind and memory, only to return again to the most unsettling and liberating possibility that you never truly began. There was no moment where you were stamped into existence. No starting line where awareness first emerged like a flare in the dark. Only a quiet unfolding, a noticing, a dream inside a dream. And perhaps that's all this has ever been. A dream that thinks it's awake. A story that believes it started on page 1. Forgetting the pages that came before it were written in invisible ink. What you call you was never formed at the first memory or the first heartbeat or even the first breath. Those were simply landmarks placed along a road that was always already unrolling beneath you. You were not born into awareness. Awareness was, you just became aware of it, and in becoming aware of it, you mistook that awakening for your origin. This is where the illusion breaks. You've spent your life believing that time moves forward, that the past is behind you and the future awaits. But what if time is just the mind's way of keeping track of its own forgetting? What if memory and identity are not containers of truth, but defenses against the overwhelming boundless fact that you were never separate from anything, that you were never not here? What happens when you sit in this realization long enough? Things begin to fade, the need to define, the craving to achieve, the fear of being nothing. They all dissolve into a warm, silent knowing that being is not earned, it is not built, it is not created. It simply is. And that includes you. You, the awareness behind the noise. You, the silence beneath the thought. You, the one who watches the self come and go like waves but does not crash. The more you search for your origin, the more you notice the absence of one, like trying to find the first drop in a river. The river was always flowing. The story was always spinning. You simply opened your eyes in the middle of it, and called that moment birth. But you never actually began. You've always been a flicker inside the infinite, a ripple inside stillness, a presence pretending to be a timeline. And now, perhaps, you're ready to stop pretending. Not to vanish, not to become nothing, but to finally rest in the fact that you've always been everything, quietly wearing the costume of a beginning. And so the story doesn't end. It never began. And you were never just a character. You were the page, the ink, the silence between the words, the awareness that has always been reading. Even now. Especially now. Still here. Still you. Still being